The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies, but also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Special thanks goes to Dean Clark, Alex McIntosh, James Richards, Tobias Whiting, Marcus Wheeler, Keith Erickson, Glenn Oberhauser, Robert Ruffner, and David Chakowzin. Guys, thank you so much for your generous support. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 180. Combat Patrol, with hosts Neil Shuck Mike Hobbs, Mike Whitaker and Dave Luff, and guest John Buck Surdu. Hello, good listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. My name's Neil Shuck, and once again I am joined by a cornucopia of presenters.
Ooh, good word.
We have the Welsh wizard and resident herder of cats, Mr. Michael Hobbs.
Why are you whispering, Neil? Why have you got all Bob Harris?
Hello!
Hello!
I don't know, talk about spoiling the ambience.
Hello. And, yes, gentle listener, I'm here.
Nice.
How's your hands?
My hands covered in scratches and bites. Yes. We've just adopted 2 cats from the Cat Protection League and trying to integrate them into our current posse of 2 cats. And it's fun.
Cats adopt you, Mike. Not the other way around. You should know that.
Yeah. So, yes, it's fun. Lots of hissing. Lots of spitting.
And after all that, you went and named one of them Genghis.
That was the name he was given at the cat home. Genghis and Monty.
The hissing and the spitting is just Hobbs.
Have you not considered that Genghis might have been a hint?
But he was so cute.
I'm sure Mr. Khan was cute on his day.
Yeah.
It was all the other times.
Yeah. I think he's got a little bit of a Siamese black heritage about him. He's jet black.
Anyway.
My uncle had a cat called Tito. Yeah. Is that one out to the listeners, that is, isn't it? Have you got an interesting cat name?
Yes. Right into us here.
So in order to expand our leadership, we're now including cats. Please do not send us your cat videos. Thank you very much. This has been a public service announcement.
Yeah, YouTube's for that.
Anyway,
do you want to invite the other 2?
Everybody else is already butting in. I've not even introduced them on the show yet. How rude can you get?
Sorry, Neil.
So we have the Phantom Cake Napper, Mr. Michael Whitaker. How's the cake, Mike?
Still some left. I've been saving it for recording sessions.
Did you freeze it down, Mike?
Lemon drizzle cake's very freezable, actually.
It's foil wrapped in the top of the fridge.
He's doing it just to spite you. He's saving it to have a slice every time you do a cast.
Got it in one.
He's promised me it'll be now between. I mean, unless Mervyn, can you save me? Can you bring me another cake at Derby? Save us, please.
Don't do it, Merv. Stand up for your rights.
And we're also joined once again, 2 weeks on the trot. What on earth is going on here? Mr. Luff, how are you, mate?
All right. It's good, isn't it? Business is settling down. Fingers crossed. Nothing can possibly go wrong.
How is the one-to-one painting business?
Very good. It's becoming very profitable, yes. And I'm enjoying it. It's good to be out the rat race. It's good to be out the corporate world. I love it.
Do you fancy coming to the Valleys? Because we got a job for you.
The Valleys?
Valleys. Okay. Stuff you then. I'll get somebody local. Well, I thought, I'd offer you, possibly with free board and some fine wines and whiskies.
Ooh, the whiskies sound very good.
Obviously, it depends on your quote.
Mates rates.
Yeah.
Oh dear! Everybody
Don't
wants
do it,
mates
mate.
rates.
So the gang's all here. It's
Don't anybody dare burst into the AA half-on theme tune there.
Pretty boy.
Yeah.
Mr. Larry-Dar gonna love.
And yes, so the gang's all here, and we're here for another 2 hours plus.
Cornucopia.
Yeah. 2 hours plus of gaming chat, interviews, and what have you. So, what have we got in store for you on tonight's show? We've got some talk. We'll once again be lifting the lid on what we've been up to over the last couple of weeks. For our main interview this time round, we will be chatting to Buck Surdu, all about Combat Patrol. Okay, a set of World War II rules with a few interestingly different mechanics. We also have a mailbag section for you this time round. So lots to be going on with. I suppose we better consider cracking on, hadn't we, chaps?
Get on with it!
It ain't going to record itself.
The eagles have gone. Britain lies defenseless in a cruel world. Since the birth of our Lord, it has been 456 years. What sins have we committed to bring this punishment to Britain? I speak, of course, of the Saxons. They came as allies, but now they seek conquest. The lands of the Britons lie ravaged before them. Blood runs red in our island. We need a leader to stand against them. We need a man to bring together the Britons in common cause. We seek a Dux Britanniarum.
Right, that's enough of that. Dux Britanniarum from Two Fat Lardies. They really are very good.
What have we been playing? What have we been buying? We might even have painted something. The Meeples and Miniatures crew reveal all. So then, folks, what have we been up to recently? Who wants to go first?
Dave, because it's always quick.
Dave, because it's always quick.
Dave, because it's always quick, because all he does is ask Neil to remember for him.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Well, me and, as normal, Neil and I have been doing things together in the non-biblical sense. Are we allowed to talk about any of this, Neil, that we've been doing?
Quite interestingly, I'm not sure. What do you reckon, Dave? Say, we're playtesting something.
In testing?
Yes, we're testing something actually which we haven't talked about at all.
No.
No.
At all.
And I think at the moment we'll just tease you with that because we really don't know whether we're allowed to say anything or not.
Is it a similar thing to what I've been testing?
No. This is different.
No, I don't think you two even know what we've been testing. It's that high top secret level.
Ooh.
Indeed.
I'll be getting a text from Neil tomorrow
then. So we've been doing some playtesting, and we were doing some prep for the interview this evening, which Dave then missed. But there we go.
Cool, that was a cheap one, wasn't it, lads?
Terrible.
I know, just because he works for a living.
All right. So what else has the Neil and Dave entity been doing?
Well, Luffy, what else have you been doing?
I got my Paras out, my American Airborne out the other day and thought, yes, I need to get those painted and sort of reorganised everything. Reorganised my Brits and it reorganised my paintboard. So maybe I'll actually get to do something this weekend because I've got quite a free weekend this weekend.
No, you haven't. You're coming out with me.
Am I?
Yeah.
Stop
your worlds, mate.
Is it this week?
Yeah, first weekend in October. It's Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, where have all the months gone? It's a good job I've got my personal secretary here, lads, because I just don't know what's going on at the moment. I'm too busy sorting my business out all the time.
Well, you must be doing something right because you've been on the show 3 times on the trot.
Yeah, it's settling down now.
Yeah. well, I mean, if you read his texts, sometime he might actually know the fact that I turned around. I asked him earlier in the week and said, "Oh, by the way, Dave, are you coming?" I bet you he hasn't even read his text.
Did you? I haven't got that. I haven't had that one. You sent it to the right Dave.
You two are like an old married couple.
Old married couple. I was just about to say that, obviously. Yeah.
Okay.
Not like us, Mike. No.
No, God, no.
No.
Okay, in that case then.
Each other's sentences.
Well, we do sometimes.
Right. Okay. In that case, then, what I'll do is we'll carry on the second half of the old married couple because it seems to link in. Right. So, yeah, we've been playing a bit of Command & Colours Ancients.
I went to the Tigers the other week as well. This weekend. Whee! Don't mention Wales.
Go Tigers.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's as bad as Neil and I going on about cricket, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not saying anything about American football because somebody's 3-0 and somebody isn't.
I am.
Yeah, I know you are.
What?
Anyway,
that's like that strange thing you're into called sci-fi, isn't it?
Yeah.
Come back, Neil. Come back.
Yeah, moving swiftly on.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we played a couple of games of Command & Colours Ancients a couple of weeks ago, in which I well and truly had my bottom handed to me. We'll leave it at that. That was horrible.
8-0.
It was 8-0 and 8-2, wasn't it? I think it was
something like that.
Yeah, it was seriously bad news. Anyway, had a game in day with Josh. So introduced Josh to first edition Battle Lore. Well, hey, finally got that back to the table after far too long. Had a great game. Game of that.
That was the bargain you picked up at Herringwood, wasn't it?
Yes, which meant that I didn't have to play with mixed painted and unpainted figures. I could play with everything unpainted, which was actually better than painted with some playing with that with some painted and some unpainted. But anyway, it's a very anal distinction. I do realise that, but playing with a mix of painted and unpainted figures was really bothering me. So I was really, really glad that I got the chance to pick up a second set so I could play with all unpainted.
There is an answer to that,
Paint everything else. I know. Oh, that's all. Yeah.
Strip the lot. Yeah.
Well, you could have always done that, yeah.
Yeah. No, the other answer was paint everything, and I was at the point thinking that way lies madness, but there we go. Right, so I did that. So I played a couple of games of Battlelore, played game of X-Wing. Oh, I do enjoy X-Wing. And again, we thought we'd do something different, so we did the old Escape from the Death Star. So Josh had Millennium Falcon with Chewie and Luke. And a couple of other things, and I had 4 TIE fighters, and it's like talk about one shot, one kill. It was horrible.
So let's drive all the way to just to play Josh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's.
But buy stuff.
Sounds like what we did for about 8 years.
Yeah. But as you say, I mean, I got a chance to chat to some other gamers and bought a couple of bits and pieces, and so it wasn't completely fruitless.
You bought something.
No, I mean, there's paint and stuff there, and it's useful. I mean, the fact that we're going to Derby this weekend is beside the point. But hey,
I hadn't heard of these purchases that you'd made. Oh, right, okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's just little bits and pieces, nothing major.
You want to check John credit card, Dave, that you two have got? And
other than that, podcast editing, and in between podcast editing, desperately trying to paint up some Planetfall stuff. Which people have seen on my vlog, and bought a couple of, looking at some stuff for research purposes. Kings of War, historical, just to have a look at it, and I mean, whether or not anything ever gets done with it, or whether we end up, I'll put it on eBay or something, I don't know. But I thought, well, if nothing else, let's have a look and give it a go, and it looks lovely, looks really nice. More about that probably in the news.
For research purposes.
Well, I know you got that phrase trademarked.
That's my phrase. That's my excuse.
Yes, and I just might have backed the odd Kickstarter.
Well, you too.
Possibly. Yes, and I'll leave it at that. Some interesting.
More of those in the news section.
More of those in the news, indeed. That's been a bit. Managed to get a whistle stop tour into Spartan Games yesterday, which was interesting, and actually completely unhobby related. It was more kind of work related, but don't want to say any more at the moment because nothing is confirmed.
Oh, cool. Shall I?
Over to you, Mr. Woodcutter, sir.
Couple of Mondays down the club. Played Sails of Glory, which is our sort of general go-to. I can't think what to play this week. I'll run another game of Sails of Glory. Carl from our club seems to have looked into somebody selling off a Sails of Glory collection on eBay. So a number of us have acquired some more ships.
Yes,
you didn't need any more ships, didn't you? Yeah.
Well, no, it's usefully allowed me to retire a couple of things with broken masts, which are a bit tough to fix, which can be turned into wreck markers, and I have enough sloops and things to repaint a few things for a pirate faction.
Is this separate to the pile of stuff you bought last week?
Oh, that may be the same pile of stuff, actually, come to think of it. I can't remember why we were discussing it last week, but yes, it's probably the same pile of stuff. What else do we do? Another round of our Kings of War tournament this week got completely pasted. Don't care because it was fun. Ruben of PE2 Collectibles fame has been picking up some stock from someone else that they don't want to stock anymore. So I've just acquired some 15mm plastic Americans and Germans and a box of M5s, which may say Flames of War on the front, but will be used for I Ain't Been Shot Mum. Should be allowing me to run some rather nice definite company plus sized actions for the club in a while when I get all painted up. Other than that, back to a couple of Kickstarters. I've been working far too hard, which is why I haven't really got as much done on things like the blog. I'm not dead, honest, folks. There will be blog articles soon, I promise.
Yeah. There was an entry that said, "I'm back." And that was it.
Yeah, which should probably have been followed up by an entry saying, "Oh my God, there's a war game show in how long?" Followed by about a week of, "Oh, thank God that's over." And I'm now currently desperately trying to finish a bunch of stuff before I get handed back to the team I'm supposed to work for at work, rather than the one I got dumped on. So, yeah, normal service will be resumed. Honest.
Cool. It's my turn.
Go on then.
No, the
Okay.
tipping cards come up.
Oh, damn.
So how many boxes turned up this week?
None. I haven't bought anything.
This week,
Other.
shock horror.
In fact, this whole month, I don't think I've really bought that much. Okay, let's say this week. Other than a load of bases from Tiny Tin Troops, which I'll come on to in a bit. But Tony at Tiny Tin Troops is what a great bloke. Literally ordered them yesterday and they were here today. Really, really fantastic service of him. So I bought lots of bases and that's about it for buying. I've been to Firestorm a couple of times and didn't buy anything. I know. Playing game. Oh,
Nothing fell off the shelf on your head.
nothing at all.
This week, no.
Well, for a long time at Firestorm, it's been really good. I've been playing Imperial Assault. We had one of our Sunday meetups with the lads, and Steve showed me and Ty how to play Imperial Assault. So we did the first of the campaign turns, which was sort of okay, and then we did the skirmish mode, which was a lot better. So that was good. And we rolled up some characters for an RPG that we're going to do. So we're going to do an RPG based on something called the Laundry, which is sort of like a British civil service secrets, thing with a bit of Cthulhu mixed in. So we're going to do a bit of RPG now and again.
Ooh.
So we rolled up that, and following on from the last podcast where I admitted to doing some playtesting for Rommel, we've been playing lots of Rommel, and I've taken my old GHQ micro armor German army, which I've had in the box for 8 years, skimmed off the top layer and made a whole load of sort of bases that could be used for Rommel or square bashing or any other large World War II game. And that's all I've been up to.
Yeah, we might be kind of getting involved in playtesting Rommel, mightn't we, Mr. Luff?
Yeah, what we've got to do, we've got to print some stuff out.
What do you mean, got to? It's all done, mate. It's all done.
That's what I mean. We've got to print the stuff out there, haven't we? We've got to print it. We've got to put it through my computer printer.
No, it's all done, mate. It's all done. I'll bring it all over tomorrow. Mind you, having said that, I say it's all done. Probably, I'm assuming that the fact that I printed a set of rules out means that it's already out of date.
We can't talk about it on the podcast.
However, yes, indeed.
I will talk about it later.
Indeed, but that
I'm not listening.
That's about as far as you got, except for the fact of discussing things to say. Yes, it sounds like it's going to be an interesting and dynamic time. So yes, looking forward to that. And but as I say, we'll. It just means that when we can talk about it, we'll be really, really, really well informed about it. Yeah.
I know nothing.
which is good. And that's that one.
Indeed. Well,
are we done?
Mm.
Well, that was quick. Haven't we all had boring weeks?
Yeah. Announcements, new releases, Kickstarters. What's caught our eye? It's time to catch up with the Meeples and Miniatures hobby news. Time for a bit of hobby news. What's been going on? What's caught our eye over the past couple of weeks? Who would like to go first?
Antic have got another Kickstarter.
Yeah, Star Saga.
Star Saga, otherwise known as as far as I can see, Dead Zone meets Dungeon Saga.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure why they decided to stay with the Saga name.
I assume because it identifies that brand of thing which involves crawling down an hole and killing things.
Except you don't get you don't get many holes in space unless they're black.
It's planet-side stuff.
Yeah, very true, I suppose. Yeah.
To be fair, they've actually seemed to have gone about it in the standard Mantic way. The core pledge is 90 quid if you got in early enough, or 100 quid, $90 if you got in early enough, or $100 if you didn't. And they are aiming for the final value of the box you get for your $100 to be nearer $300. In the classic Mantic add stretch goals as it goes a long way. And to be honest, I was quite fond of Dungeon Saga. I can see a lot of potential in quite a lot of the figures and scenery they're generating for all manner of things, and it is quite a fun little system, so I pledged.
I am considering it simply because of backing because I backed both Dead Zone Kickstarters.
Yeah, I didn't back the second one.
And I already see there appears to be an interesting crossover potential.
Yeah. They're also, the other interesting crossover I note is they've just added, is it Starship Pandora scenario as a stretch goal in the same way that they did for the original Dwarf King's hold in Dungeon Saga.
Project Pandora.
Project Pandora, yeah.
I thought essentially this was effectively a replacement for Project Pandora.
In the same way that Dungeon Saga is a replacement for Dwarf King's hold.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it looks okay. It's a lovely source of yet more nice 28mm sci-fi miniatures.
Yeah,
well, you haven't seen them.
I've seen the sculpts. You know, the sculpts on the Kickstarter. There's some nice, interestingly slightly more civilian than some of the typical Mantic armoured up to the eyeballs types. Some human lab techs and security guards, which are quite nice, sort of low-level armour sci-fi figures, which I can see being quite useful for all manner of things. But yeah, and being Mantic, needless to say, it's gone off like the proverbial express train.
Indeed, and as I say, it's things like them upgrading to plastic scenery and a few other bits and pieces. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm in two minds about it at the moment. Maybe not. I mean, I know it's not on for particularly long, isn't it? It's only running for a couple of weeks, isn't it?
23 days to go.
Oh, longer than I thought.
It finishes on the 21st of October.
Right. So plenty of time for me to kind of stop dilly-dallying
and vacillating. Yeah,
indeed, and actually make up my mind what I do.
186,000. There's a science fiction number to conjure with. Dollars out of $100,000, with 1,774 backers. And in short, it's doing what Mantic Kickstarters do. And if you like what it offers and you like their business model, pledge. If you don't.
Whilst on the subject of Kickstarters, Mr. Hobbs.
Yeah, my fault. I backed one.
Yeah, it's all your fault.
Yeah. So the Heroes of Normandy people, Devil Pig Games, over in France, which we teased on our last episode, I think, or the one before. They have released their tactical card game, which is each unit is a company, and it's done on a map, and it looks quite interesting.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's only 3 pledges, which are either £30,
euros. Although it's nearly enough the same thing these days, isn't it?
Standalone game, this is, Mike.
Yeah, completely standalone. So €30 for the basic game, or the second one, which is €45, which gives you the basic game plus a D-Day expansion plus a Rangers Lead the Way expansion,
plus all the stretch goals.
Plus all the stretch goals.
And there's quite a few stretch goals so far, isn't there?
There's an awful lot of stretch goals gone out, and that finishes on 15 days' time, and it's €63,000.
Today they've just announced a new purchasable add-on, which is Battle of the Bulge, but based around Easy Company and Baston, which looks
Sounds fun.
Interesting. And at the moment, there are now two. There's that one, there's a French Resistance one, and they're both saying they are Kickstarter exclusives.
Mm.
Oh,
So-
they say this only once. Thought you were going to say that.
Yeah.
And they're both saying,
funnily
say
enough.
this only once.
Oh, funnily enough, yes.
But no, it looks good, and they've got the rules for download for people to have a look at. They've got some reviews on there. So the rules look quite interesting. And as you say, it's a standalone game.
And it's an interesting one. It's a company level game. It's meant to last 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So it really is meant to be quite light and So it does look really interesting. Standard artwork, the same as in Heroes of Normandy. If you've seen Heroes of Normandy at all, you'll know that actually the production values are really, really good. So, I thought €45. That's quite a good deal.
Yeah. They've also got a print and play version of it as well. You can download and actually play when the scenario's out. So again, well worth having a little play around. And if you're interested, go and back it. I have.
Yeah, I did as well.
I did.
Right. Interestingly, something out just more on the subject of Kickstarters and a board game. PSC Games. Hello, Will. Our good friend Will Townsend. They're currently running a project which is actually effectively a pre-order, because not only is the game currently in production, but they're hoping to release it at Essenspiel, which is like the middle of October. Okay, so this really is like, okay, we're doing this game, kickstart it now, and one of the pledges is kickstart it and pick it up at Essen. Okay, so this is a 1914 version of the Ian Brody game Quartermaster General. You may remember, I think Hobbsy, did you back the Kickstarter to get the Victory or Death version?
No, I just bought the rules when they came out.
Oh, you just bought it when they came out. Okay, so there's a Victory or Death version which is Peloponnesian.
Peloponnesian War, yeah.
Peloponnesian War, yeah, indeed. Which is something that Hobbs is massively into. The original Quartermaster General is World War II, and they're releasing a 1914 World War I version, which is running, again, another Kickstarter, running until the 7th of October, but then again, the game is then due for release in October anyway, so they're releasing it at Essen. So this one, more than anything else you might come across in Kickstarter recently, is very much a pre-order system.
Now, I have to ask why. Why is he doing that? Because he's going to lose 10% for putting it for Kickstarter. Why can't he just do it on his site and just advertise the hell out of it? Do you make that much more money for having it on Kickstarter?
Yes, you do. People do stupid things with Kickstarters. Kickstarter punters they would not do if it was just a pre-order on a site.
Yeah.
It is really interesting that's a conversation.
Even if you do it Will's way.
Yeah, that's a conversation that if you follow Annie Norman on Facebook, that's something that she's been having a discussion about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very recently. So yeah, it is an interesting one. Next,
new wargaming podcast, the Veteran Wargamer. So, Jay Arnold.
Hello, Jay.
Hello, Jay.
All right, mate.
Indeed, regular listener.
Yeah. And now follows most of us on Twitter, I think. Just released his podcast, Veteran Wargamer.
It's good.
So,
Good first episode.
Yeah.
Very good production values. Really impressed with it. So much better. So much better than when I started. I mean, it was lovely.
Just crack on enough. I speak from experience that you've got half a dozen episodes under your belt, and then it'll sort of acquire enough momentum to keep going. Mine never did. Then I got roped in with you lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So best of luck to Jay. Keep it up, mate.
Indeed.
And maybe we'll have to do that crossover episode one day.
Yes. So Kickstarters. One of my little interests, as I'm sure folks have noticed, is 3D terrain printing.
Oh,
Kickstarters.
No,
Has anyone seen Dragonlock?
Yes.
Oh my! So, effectively, you've got it's a modular fantasy building set of 3D printing plans. The nice thing about them is the way they're designed is that you have effectively wooden floor tiles, which have a little, a little socket in each corner into which you can insert what's effectively a corner post, and then all your wall pieces slide in between the corner posts. So it makes for quite a rigid little setup. It's built on, I think, a 10 mil grid, 100 mil grid or 50 mil grid. But the nice thing about it is that you've got a series of pledges of series of styles. You can have it as half timbered. You can have it as field stone. You can have it as wood. You can have it as, what was the other one? There was another one somewhere. There's about four different levels of wall design, depending on how much you pledge. Plus, there's a whole set of village walls, and then there are stretch goals coming out of your ears because they've actually done ridiculously well. They started out wanting, I think it was $500. Yes, $500, and they've made nearly 100,000. Well, yeah, quite. Pledges start around the $30 for one. Oh, cobblestone streets alone is $15. Timber frame buildings and everything builds on. You get the previous pledge level. Timber frame buildings at $30. Fieldstone at $45. Wooden at $60. Village walls and gates on top of that at $75. Village furnishings, which is market tiles and stuff. And then, obviously enough, they've got stretch goals coming out of their ears. So they've got things like a whole bunch of lovely market square bits of scenery, some dungeon-type sewer bases, a windmill, which looks very nice, including an optional water wheel, some ruins, so you can replace some of your walls with ruins, and some dungeon tiles.
You do realise I'm going to end up buying one of these at some point in time, Neil.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, Tim the Builder's here next week to put up the desking so I can actually get mine up. I am seriously considering pledging for this because, by God, there's some very tasty printed design work going on here.
Interestingly enough, while on the subject of 3D printing, another Kickstarter, Maki Games. Okay, Maki Games, M-I-M-A-K-I, currently in the process of producing a modular underground project, which is producing it's basically plastic underground system. It was on my Kickstarter roundup from the 9th of September, if you're looking on the blog. However, more recently, because they were asked, well, why didn't you do this as a 3D printable terrain? And they turned around and said, well, effectively, if you did this, it would be blooming expensive. However, they have recently, as one of the stretch goals on that campaign, because it's doing rather well, said, okay, some of the terrain that we want to produce is a bit unusual, and actually, because we're doing the rest in plastic, to actually produce a plastic die for this, actually, we don't think we'd sell enough of them to warrant actually producing the die so that we could cast it in plastic. So instead, for things like that, they are, rather than release, getting some sort of plastic or resin kit, they're releasing the 3D printing files for it. So you almost get like the best of both worlds. It's really interesting.
They are indeed. Yeah, I'm looking through this. They've got a nice set of 3D files for some chests and tables and stuff. They're marked as STL stretch goals, which is how you spot them. That does look rather fun, doesn't it? So yeah, lots of good modular scenery around these days.
Interesting things in the hobby, though, isn't it? With this, where's it going to take us?
Oh hell yeah! Well, Hobbsy thinks he's not going to take us anywhere for about 5 years, so we'll ignore him and just let it.
Hang on, I said that's for figures. It's good. It's going to be good.
No, now you're weaseling out of it.
No, I've always said figures. You're still 5 years away from.
And I still say you're not.
I think it's going to be closer than you think.
Thank you, Luffy. Beers on me.
Next.
No, he's got the
Yeah, next, as you wish.
What's in the front of your living room, Neil?
Did you not get the reference? Come on, guys.
Yes. Sorry. I did get the reference.
Grief, yes. Antediluvian miniatures.
However, I hadn't clicked on the link. Permission to drool.
Yeah. Now these are so good. Yeah. Now, guys who have not gone down the Kickstarter route, but just come out with a set of figures.
Just like that.
And I think
It's novel. That's never going to catch on.
It's not, is it? I mean, it's really just not the way forward, is it?
Okay, now Antediluvian let's face it, have released some a somewhat eclectic range of miniatures so far.
They did that brilliant set of Lost Worlds figures, didn't they?
Yes, yeah. If you fancy recreating Warlords of Atlantis, for example, that's the place to go. Because they have a complete set of minis from Warlords of Atlantis, or inspired by, shall we say. But they had just released a set of 4 figures, inspired by a certain...
A book by Samuel Morgenstern.
Indeed, and subsequent film, The Princess Bride. And yes, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You can move further, prepare to die.
Spoiler alert, some of us haven't seen it.
I'm sorry?
What? Obviously, seriously?
Inconceivable!
You do not think that word means what you think it means.
And they go, what are you on about?
I got no idea what you're talking about.
What are they going on about, Hobbsy?
I don't know.
Neither of you have seen The Princess Bride.
Oh, my word.
Oh, you're right. That needs fixing.
It does.
Gentle listener, should you agree with us on this, you know where to write.
Indeed. Princess Bride is an absolutely classic film. It's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic.
It is, in the nicest possible way. I don't mean that in any way. It is possibly the most charming fantasy movie that I think has ever been put out. It is absolutely brilliant.
Well, even better than Willow. Oh, dear, the irony.
Immeasurably. In fact, to the extent that if you ask me to list my favourite movies ever, it is joint top.
Do you know what? You got any idea what they're talking about, Hobbsy?
No.
Just rent yourself a copy. Trust me.
Okay.
It is brilliant, and it is so eminently quotable. It is untrue.
You know what? I only ever went to see it in the cinema to start with because it had a Mark Knopfler soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, soundtrack is awesome.
Oh, nice. That's one reason to avoid it.
Luffy, you are a Philistine.
Anyway, the figures are...
Yeah. The figures
are inspired by the bandits. Wow. And obviously, the bandits in the film. Obviously, we've only got half the major protagonists. Because we haven't got the bad guys and we haven't got the damsel in distress. But all being well, we shall hopefully see those in the near future. It's a similar miniatures line to what we've recently seen with the, with those miniature criminals.
Well, you mean the Time Bandits?
Yes, them as well. Yes,
as well.
Let's not mess around.
Yes.
We've already turned around and said these are for Princess Bride.
Oh yeah, fair enough. Yeah. It's in the same vein to the guy. To the Time Bandit stuff. So hopefully we will see the other characters appear. But I mean, these are fantastic sculpts. Really, really nice.
They're lovely.
Oh my word! I'll go to the front of our room. Arrived today, actually, because it arrived on sale over the weekend. I have in my own grubby hands a copy of Kings of War Historical. Woohoo!
I haven't yet.
I have literally just opened it. As in, just open the box. So I can't tell you anything more about it other than the fact that it's very glossy, it's very well produced, it is full colour, paperback, it is 130 pages with army lists. Oh, it's got army lists which take up either 1 or 2 pages. I mean, generally it's a page plus a page of pretty pictures. At the end, rather interestingly, it then goes into how to incorporate spells and mythical units like undead and giants and dragons. And
let's face it, if you're playing some bits of Greek mythology, there's perfectly reasonable arguments for doing that in concert with an ordinary Greek army.
I suppose fair enough.
For example.
Okay, but essentially what it does... okay, so you've got... Where are we? We've got... It's essentially the Kings of War rules, so it's got 46 pages of rules, and then the rest are army lists. So it's got basic army lists.
Right. The rules are substantially identical to Kings of War.
Yeah.
The army lists suffer, I think, from the same problem as WAB, in that if you choose to treat the whole book as a source book, you'll get some horribly ahistorical nonsense.
Yeah.
If you're actually prepared to do the kind of level of work that, say, our good friend Mr. Hawes puts into designing a campaign or a campaign day for WAB or War and Conquest, and say, look, pick from the following list with the following restrictions, you can produce something that's probably quite fun and reasonably well balanced and historical. And I have to say, more power to Mantic for producing a nice quick play mass combat historical. If it gets people into historical gaming, I'm all for it.
Just to give you a quick list of what's going on, we have Scottish, Holy Roman Empire, English. 100 Years of War English, 100 Years of War French, Conquistadors, Aztecs, Ottomans, Byzantines, Mongols, Japanese, as in samurai.
You did start that halfway through, didn't you?
No, I'm going back to front.
Oh, right. That's a relief. I was getting worried for a minute.
Crusaders, Vikings, Slavs, Polish, Normans, Franks, Anglo-Saxons, Huns, Thracians, Scythians, Spartans, Romans, Persians, Macedonians and successors, Indian, Greeks, Egyptians, Chinese, Carthaginians, and barbarians. There you go.
And from what I understand, these are all fairly generic lists, but with the ability to fine-tune them a bit depending on precise historical period. And one of the criticisms I've been hearing is that, they're all generic and horrible. And frankly, yes, they are. But if you want to make them not, the amount of effort needed to do so is not beyond the wit of man.
But it's nice. It's nicely put together, and for 20 quid, paperback 20 quid set of rules, it's kind of what you'd expect for the money these days. It is very, very nicely produced. We'll have a look at it, and we'll give a more in-depth review in a future show.
It doesn't hand you precise historical recreation on a plate, and if you were expecting it to, sorry.
Indeed.
All right, I've got one.
Go on then.
And it's a personal one. Right. October the 15th.
Aha!
Yes, in Cardiff. Now, Fryston Games.
Oh, leap.
Yes. They have their bring and buy sale day, which is a day where people can buy a table and sell their stuff. So it's a big open day. They got the bar there. They got their chef Christian there selling very nice food. So on that day, they also tend to put on demos, and I've sort of been talked into arranging a Two Fat Laddies Day. So on October the 15th in Cardiff at Fryston Games, we have the very first outing of Lardiff, a Two Fat Laddies gaming day. So what we are doing is
is that with 2 hours?
Yes, Lardiff. Oh, Cardiff. So we've got Big Richie's coming down with his sharp practice game that he had at Harewood. The Viva Las Vegas.
Viva Las Vegas. Yeah.
We've got
Yeah, the other day, John.
Yes, we've got Nick Skinner, who's going to be doing a big chain of command game set in Holland or no, around that period. We've got the Martian practice game from Matt and Ralph, which was at Harewood. We've got Rob Avery coming down and doing Iron Bin Shotman with 15mm somewhere in Russia. We've got local boys Jeff and Steve who are going to be doing a chain of command game again in Normandy. And we've got the custard guzzlers, Jason and Nathan, coming down doing Dux Britanniarum. So it's all free. All you have to do, if you're in the area and you want to learn about Two Fat Laddies, come along. I'll be there doing demos and talking about rules, and you can just join in and play the game. If you want to join in for 5 minutes.
Do not pass up the opportunity to get a demo of Shot Practice from Rich.
Yeah, It's all completely free. You just turn along, you can play a game.
Hang on, you gave the list of rules out, and nothing was mentioned about you and the War of 1812.
Well, that's all last week. Now I'm going to be the sweeper, so I should be just basically chat to people who are there. If they're interested, I'll get them into a game.
So 1812. Okay. So last year now, Mick?
It's so last century, man. Or even the century before. So there you go. A Two Fat Laddie gaming day free. Come along, play a game.
15th of October, Firestorm Games, which, if you don't know where it is just around the corner from Cardiff Station.
2 minute walk. There is a bar, there is food, there is things you can buy.
There's a bar.
There is a bar.
There's a bar, Neil.
Yeah, there's one slight problem. There's one slight fly in the ointment with this.
What's that?
I'll be on my way to the Western Isles of Scotland. I was gutted.
I'll just sleep under a table.
Come on down, Dave. I've got a spare room, mate.
Carnage!
Yep. Then you can price up that painting and decorating job that I've got.
What's this practicing for Evesham? Yeah, a pre-Evesham Carnage kind of run through.
Yeah,
I'm dreading you two getting together and drinking. Good grief!
It was bad enough when we didn't stay.
You were getting very twitchy.
I got so much earache for that. Why aren't we staying?
Where
you are staying this time, aren't you?
He tells me there's no rooms.
Well, there's no single rooms.
Yeah,
share a room.
He's booked you the honeymoon suite.
Oh my god.
It's lovely, the honeymoon suite. Leather sofa, you know.
Lovely boy.
Anyway, are we done?
I think we better be.
I'm going to pitch a tent in the car park.
Sleep under a war games table.
I'll sleep in the van.
Indeed. So I think that's about it. I think we're about done for the news. So yes, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking quite extensively in the end, as it turned out, to Buck Surdu. Have you ever wondered what's going on in wargaming? We do too. So come with us as we go behind the hobby with the Meeples and Miniatures interview. We're very pleased to welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, John Buck Surdu. Hello, Buck. Welcome to the show. It's really good to speak to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, Buck is the author. Well, the latest thing we're going to talking about today. He's the author of a recently released set of rules. Well, we say recently. It was kind of back in May now that these came out, called Combat Patrol. But Buck has been writing rules for quite some time now. I mean, I remember back in the day, Fire Team Vietnam. Now, there was a decent set of rules. I remember those.
Really? Wow, thanks. I appreciate that.
No, I love them. And I was suddenly thinking, that's more years ago than it probably would care to remember. That was a while ago now. But no, I love those. So it's great. It's great to finally get a chance to have you on the show and chat to you. But there's a lot of people out there who maybe aren't quite as familiar with you and the sort of thing you've done. So as regular listeners will know, when we get a new guest on the show, the first thing we do is ask them all about their gaming background and how they got into the hobby. So Buck, can you give us an introduction to yourself and how did you get into gaming in the first place?
Sure. So, and I'll try not to go too long with this introduction, but I think it's kind of an interesting story. So, there was a point when I was, I guess, in junior high, when the news programs, the 6 o'clock news programs, tried to do a little public interest piece at the end of each episode. There was a segment on there that talked about Jack Scrooby and his group out in California, and some of your listeners probably have heard of Jack Scrooby, but he was kind of one of the first miniatures manufacturers here in the States and helped popularize miniatures gaming over here. But so and they were talking about Waterloo, and I just thought that was really neat. Both my parents taught history, and I was interested in history, and I'm seeing folks with their toy soldiers and they're refighting these battles, and I thought that was really sort of interesting. And about the same time, I had gotten my hands on a copy of The War Game by Peter Young, in which he describes 10 great battles in history, and many of the illustrations are with wargaming figures. And kind of the third thing was that was about the time that the hardcover re-release of Little Wars came out. And so between those three things, oh no, and there was a fourth thing. My grandmother bought me what she thought was a book and turned out to be one of the SPI American Civil War folio games. So I had this board war game and these books about miniatures, and I was hooked, right? It was sort of a religious experience. And then went to a local hobby store and saw all these figures and rules and games, and it was, boy, my first foray into design actually happened in high school, and designed a couple of things that were really lousy and threw them away, but came up with a little board game called Beer and Pretzels Urban Combat. It used a card-based activation scheme, and everybody had a squad of troops, and you ran around this sort of stylized urban environment, and it was kind of fun. And my dad taught at a high school that was they had a vocational program. Right now, getting involved in the trades seems to have some kind of a negative connotation. But back then, a lot of schools taught trades, and they had a print shop, and they were always looking for things to print. So they took this game that I designed, which was in 4 colors, and had to do the 4 color separations manually and all that. And and they needed projects, so they printed it. So I had some of those. And I remember when I was at West Point giving some copies to some of my friends. And one day I was walking down the hallway in one of the academic buildings, and I was hearing all the screaming and yelling. And when I got there, I found out that it was guys just hooping and hollering over Beer and Pretzel Urban Combat. So that really hooked me on game design. Right, the first thing was the challenge of game design, but then when I saw other people having a great time playing a game that I had written, the hook was set at that point. So I've been designing games ever since.
Did the likes of Don Featherstone and Terence Wise, these books, make it over there or not?
Oh, absolutely. But, I didn't get exposed to them until later. A lot of the Featherstone stuff I've picked up since then in hardcover and paperback, and as I could find them. But I really didn't see a lot of the classic wargaming texts, like Charge and a lot of the Featherstone stuff, and Moorshower and those until much later, probably well after college graduation, when I started going to more conventions and actually perusing.
I couldn't help overhearing during your introduction that you mentioned West Point. So I take it from that, and for those people that may not know, you're in the military.
Well, I was. So I graduated in 1985 and started my career in the infantry, and then did some other things. I retired about 3 years ago from the Army.
That's a good long session in the Army.
That's a good stint, isn't it?
A good stint. So you were writing rules whilst you were still an active soldier?
I was, and in fact, so I said I began my career in the infantry, and actually, so my gaming interests really started with the American Civil War with Airfix figures and a set of rules called Rally Round the Flag. That was really my first miniatures experience. And it was because, I said earlier that my parents taught history. When other families would go to the Grand Canyon or Disneyland, we went to Civil War battlefields. So I've been to Gettysburg many times, and now I'm not an expert on the Civil War like some of my friends or my dad are, but that sort of always stayed with me. And so, but then when I got to West Point, I got exposed to Napoleonics. We had a German professor who got a bunch of us involved, and he had all the figures we actually needed to play, but he got us all painting. So everybody picked a country, and whatever you got painted, he would throw into the game. And we gamed about one Saturday a month. There wasn't a lot of time in those days to do a lot of gaming, but we gamed about one Saturday a month, and he would bring all of his figures, and we would just chip in what we had finished. And the only country that hadn't been taken by the time I joined late, I was a year behind most of the other guys in the club, was England, in fact. And so my first lead miniatures were British minifigs. So my interest in gaming were the big battles. And what I found when I was stationed in Italy was that it was really daunting for a lot of people I was trying to recruit into gaming when they looked at, 3,000 figures and a bunch of white waist belts. So that's when I actually started getting into World War II skirmish, because, I figured the most that a player would ever need is maybe a platoon's worth with some maybe some attachments, and they're reasonably easy to paint. You could get away with a lot of dry brushing and khaki and green. So that's when I first started to get interested in World War II gaming. And what I found is, from my historical reading and my experience doing infantry work, that the infantry training actually, I think, really influenced my designs in terms of, what you can do and what's important to represent and some of those aspects. So I think the Army business, spending time in the Army, I think has made my game design stronger over time. And then in fact, years later, so the Army has a tendency of making sure that they figure out exactly what you're good at and then assigning you to do something exactly opposite. But strangely enough, at one point in my career, the Army assigned me to build a new combat simulation, computer-based simulation that's used for training and experimentation and analysis. And, I taught software engineering, and my background was in artificial intelligence, and they assigned me to develop a combat model for the Army that used artificial intelligence and my software engineering skills and all those things. So that's you're more likely to win the lottery than to have that happen to you. So I was very fortunate. And so it really allowed me to use my grad school experience in terms of simulation and probabilities and statistics and design. I got to do that professionally as well as a hobby. And one of the things that really struck me during that building a simulation for the DoD, the Department of Defense, was that hobby of wargaming does significantly better than military simulations, and that is the representation of the soft factors: morale, cohesion, fatigue. We at least represent them, sometimes imperfectly, but in most military simulations that are used to train units and commanders, those things are distinctly absent.
That, and I guess also friction and perfect versus imperfect knowledge.
Well, so no, that's actually represented very well in the military simulations, because as an operator, you're given a role. I'm a battalion commander, I'm a company commander, whatever the echelon of the experiment or the exercise is. And generally, if it's done well, you're only allowed to see on your screen those things that the units that belong to you have sensed and reported. So they actually handle that kind of thing very well, right? Friction and the fact that you can tell a battalion to start moving, but it takes a little while before they actually start moving, because there's a lot of yeah. So that they represent very well, but like I said, distinctly absent are those soft factors like fatigue and cohesion and morale. And a lot of gamers don't like to represent those things either, but at least we do.
That's quite interesting, because I know that a guy named John Fernandez, who runs GHQ, he was, I think he was a major in the Marine Corps in the artillery. And so in his rules, he also brought in what he learned from combat experiences and put those into the rules, almost like a simulation. Did you find yourself doing a similar thing when you started writing your rules, sort of bringing in what you learned about and everything into the rules and try to condense all that into the set of rules?
I did when I design rules that are close to my experience, right? So World War II and the Vietnam thing, and not that I was in Vietnam, but I mean they're closer to my experience than Napoleonics, right? For Napoleonics or some of the other ancients or some of those kinds of things, I've had to rely on, like everybody else, on secondary sources and those kinds of things. But yes, I find that my experiences in the infantry and later on, when I was working on a brigade staff as a planner and those kinds of things, those experiences I think have made my design stronger and have influenced the designs. And then later on in my career, so I talked about going off to build a simulation. So there was a point in my career after about 9 years in the infantry when the Army said, "Oh, we need a guy with a computer science degree to go do some stuff." And so they kind of snatched me out of the infantry and sent me down a different career path. So that's how I got to design computer simulation for the Army.
So for people who don't know your back catalogue, do you want to give us a quick run through of the games that you've developed?
Oh gosh, I'll probably miss a couple. Let's see. So the first one I did was that board game, Beer and Pretzels Urban Combat, and then let's see. I came back from Italy and linked up with a friend, and we designed a set of rules called Battles for Empire, which was in many ways a reaction to Empire 3 and 4 and the level of complication and sophistication in those rules. I just found that, I played Empire for probably 5 years, and
did you read the first turn?
I'm sorry? Yes. No, you know what? Scotty Bowden was really trying to do some clever things in those rules, and there are aspects of them that are really quite good, but I just think they don't fit today's tastes in terms of how long a turn is and some of them. But the telescoping turns and the skirmish combat and the maneuver element baseline and some of those things he was trying to do to get kind of that grand tactical feel were really clever, but it's just not what people are looking for these days. So anyway, we designed Battles for Empire, and then we wrote the same guy, Tom Vossman, and I, we wrote a scenario book that we were really proud of at the time. Now I look back on it, it's kind of primitive, and called Napoleonic Scenarios. And then I did something called Beer and Pretzels Skirmish.
Oh, Beer and Pretzels Skirmish. I remember that well.
Do you?
Oh, yeah. Or maybe that just dates me.
Well, so, I was trying to get to... So one of the points I try to make to folks who are interested in game design is, don't be afraid to throw something away that's not working. So on the way to Beer and Pretzel Skirmish, I actually designed, wrote, and threw away 2 full sets of rules. There's one called Action Front, and I was trying to be a little experimental. So in one of the sets I threw away, you rolled to see if you hit the enemy, and then they rolled to see what the effect was. And so it was my attempt to get at sort of limited knowledge of what was happening, right? You knew that there was no fire coming from the window, but it could be because you killed the guy, or it could be because he ran away or something. So of course it required the players to be honest. Anyway, so that one went by the wayside, and I did Beer and Pretzel Skirmish, which there are still some aspects of Beer and Pretzel Skirmish that I really proud of, right? So one of the things was the way I handled fire combat, where you fire into an area, but what made that counterintuitive to a lot of folks was you made a die roll for each guy in the target area, not for each shooter. So you added up the fire team's combat power and you divided that across an area. And so, if you were firing your whole fire team at a kind of a point target, you had a fair chance of being successful. But if you spread that across a larger area, you could potentially affect more figures, but the likelihood was smaller. And the Army used to have a manual on rate and distribution of fire at the squad and platoon level. And when I was training lieutenants, I used to refer to that manual quite often. It's no longer in the inventory, but a very difficult task for a team leader or squad leader is to make sure that 4 guys don't shoot at the same guy, that they're covering their full sector and those kinds of things. So to get at that, I have this notion of area of fire where, there's a chance you're going to hit the same guy more than once or not hit anybody, the guy you want to hit, because everybody's busy shooting at the target they see as opposed to the target they should be scanning for, and those kind of things. So anyway, so then there was Beer and Pretzels, Skirmish, and then following that, I was asked by Russ Dunaway at Old Glory to write a set of rules for Vietnam. Russ is a Vietnam veteran, decorated U.S. Marine, and he was working with West Wind, I think, to put out a set of figures for Vietnam. And so that's when I did Fireteam Vietnam, which you mentioned earlier. And the experimental piece in there, right? So I try, when I write a set of rules, I don't know that I always succeed, but I try to offer something different, right? I mean, there's not much sense particularly with the glut of rules on the market, with offering something that's pretty much the same as a lot of other things on the market right now. I know a lot of people think that everything they do is unique and exciting and swell, but anyway, so the experimental thing I was trying to do with Fireteam Vietnam is there's no morale phase, right? So your things that happen to you that would normally result in a morale check are used in the subsequent turn to determine your level of activation from, active to pinned or whatever. So I got rid of the morale phase that people don't like sometimes without actually getting rid of the representation of morale. So that was a little bit different, but it was definitely an evolution of Beer and Pretzels Skirmish, right? In fact, we've used Fireteam Vietnam for World War II games. The activation mechanism allowed you to command a little bigger force than is reasonable.
Can I backtrack a shade?
Sure.
You commented both on being involved in software engineering and the concept of throwing one away, which is a very, very common plan to throw one away, is one of the sayings that happens in software development. Do you find yourself also suffering from second system syndrome, where the second one you build, you try and build in every single feature and realize that you've over-egged the pudding?
I hope not. I don't think I do. So when I was doing Combat Patrol, for instance, and I had playtest copies out to some of the guys I game with, everybody wants you, and also with the Look Sarge family rules, right? Everybody wants you to add this nuance or that little factor, or, the Imperial Werewolf Division at this battle did extra swell, so you need to represent that in your rules somehow. So I try to really focus on the right level of abstraction, and before I add a modifier or a special case, I really sort of grill myself on whether or not that's really necessary, and to try to get that down to that handful of factors, right? So that started with, Battles for Empire was, the chart cards were 6 sheets of paper, which is about a third of the sort of a tactical Napoleonic set of rules. I tried to keep everything down to a single sheet of paper. BAPS was, I think, 2 chart cards, depending on which version you're looking at. And when we did Gaslight and Battles by Gaslight and some of those systems, I tried to get it down so it's on a 3-inch by 5-inch card. And then, of course, with the Look Sarge systems and Combat Patrol, I tried to mostly eliminate chart cards entirely. So that process of really thinking through exactly why am I adding this modifier, and is it already taken into account in the randomness of the die roll, or whether or not I actually really need a modifier for that or a special case. And so actually, when I designed Wellington rules, people who had played Battles for Empire actually gave me a hard time about having gotten rid of some special cases and things from Battles for Empire. They said, where's this? And in Wellington rules, you got rid of that, right? So I don't think I suffer from that phenomenon, but I understand it.
So you mentioned Gaslight, which is a sort of Victorian sci-fi set of rules, isn't it? If I remember rightly.
Yes, it is. And we were very fortunate. There were people who were very critical of Gaslight because they described it as a beta system that wasn't really baked and those kinds of things. But, we designed it to be very open-ended. So in some cases, it was kind of a construction set, right? There were rules on how to build characters and units and vehicles and strange weapons and crazy creatures and those kinds of things. And because of its open-ended nature, and because it seemed like when it first came out, we were kind of at the front edge of the Victorian science fiction later steampunk craze. It really attracted those guys who were scratch builders and like to build crazy contraptions, and really got into the kind of tongue-in-cheek notion of Victorian era adventurers, in the vein of H. Rider Haggard, and, Edgar Rice Burroughs and those kind of.
Yeah.
So in the timing of the release of Gaslight, and not try to create our own world, backstory, history, and again that really resonated with folks at the time, because there was one guy who had built his whole campaign around a Prussian invasion of Mexico, and other people were doing Darkest Africa things, because about that time, soon afterwards, or right about that time, the Darkest Africa line figures started to hit the streets, and soon after the release of Gaslight, we found out that there were a lot of players who wanted to play larger battles than Gaslight was intended, and they were sort of calling on us on the line to fix it. So we and that was Chris Palmer, is my partner on the Gaslight series of rules, and so he and I started talking about how could we streamline Gaslight to allow people to, instead of controlling 1 or 2 units, to control 4 or 5 or 6 units. And so we streamlined the activation system a little bit. And in fact, that activation system we designed for Gaslight, or Battles by Gaslight, is kind of the prototype for what was later done in the Luxard family of rules and then Combat Patrol. And I guess we'll talk about that later. And then, of course, my real interest, so I love Victorian science fiction, but my real interest was always in the pulp stuff. My dad and I had collected for years a lot of the movie serials that showed on Saturdays. And in fact, my first exposure to movie serials, since I grew up near Detroit, we used to get a lot of Canadian television, and there was a channel there that had a show called Magic Shadows, hosted by a guy named Elwee Yost, and I always remember that name because it sounds so unique to me. But he used to show a lot of the Ealing Studios movies, a half hour a night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then he would show a movie serial, so an episode. And so that's where I got to see movies like Went the Day Well and some of those really classic British films. But so I wanted to do pulp stuff, so we adopted Gaslight to do pulp games, and there was another little supplement. So we kind of followed the customers in terms of what they were looking for, and we built a supplement that would provide kind of the Gaslight way of representing the things that they wanted to represent, but still in an open-ended way where we tried not to over-constrain folks. Then I became very interested in kind of the battalion level, brigade level World War II, and was really not happy with the speed of play, and not just the speed of play, but the speed of that things happened in a lot of the rules that were available at the time. So I started working on a set of rules. That was another case where 2 sets of rules were developed and thrown away. And then I came up with Luxard No Charts World War II, which was very, very proud of when it came out. It wasn't necessarily a commercial success, but I think you really get a sense of movement and a sense of friction. And that gave me a chance also to then refine the activation scheme that's used now in Combat Patrol. And we didn't even get, Chris and Dave and I didn't even get Luxard No Charts World War II published before guys in the club were already trying to adapt it to other historical periods. So then what followed was Union So Tested, which is Luxard No Charts for the American Civil War. And then, of course, my first love is Napoleonic, so we did a Napoleonic version. That is the most complicated of the sets of rules in that series because we made the decision to represent explicitly formations. Oh, wow. So there's some dirtiness that results from that. And the skirmish fight. So we had a way of representing the skirmish fight. And then we did the Ancients and Ancients Medieval and Fantasy version. And now we're starting to play around with a near future science fiction version of that. So what will that bring? So in that Luxard family of rules, I didn't set out to design a set of rules that didn't have a chart card. But after a while, it sort of became a challenge, right? I built these special dice to handle spotting. which I think is a very elegant spotting system, and we built the activation scheme, which I think is very elegant. But then, there's only so much you can represent with a tiny label on the back of the base and some special dice. And so it really became a challenge to really think hard about, does this thing need a modifier or a system or an attribute, or is that really taken into account with the randomness of the stochastic process, the die roll? Because, we tend to want to take some of those things into account, but historically, we don't have enough data points in most cases, right? So the law of large numbers will tell you that you need at least 30 data points before you have something that starts to resemble a normal or a bell curve distribution. And without trying to bore everybody with math, right, our historical records are a single data point, and we don't really know if that's a mean, if that's near the mean, or if that's two standard deviations out along one of the tails. So, so I think that a lot of rules designers are tempted to put in a bunch of +1, +2, -5% kind of modifiers to represent every special case or everything that they've read about in their history books and memoirs and things, when in fact those special cases will occur, I think, by virtue of the die roll, right? So, this unit defended to the last man. Well, they made some great morale rolls and they defended to the last man. On the other hand, they ran away at the first sound of fire. Both of those things happen. And the die roll, if the rest of the systems are designed right, the die roll will get to most of those things. So in the LuxArts no charts family of things, it then became a challenge, right? Of how can I represent those things that are really salient at the level of abstraction designed for the player. So in other words, in LuxArts no charts World War II, the player is a battalion commander. So only things that are within the battalion commander's purview should be represented. Everything else should be transparent, right, or magic. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the Napoleonic series. Now, I broke the paradigm when we did Fate of Battle, because the division commander probably, in most cases, isn't worried about where his skirmishers are sitting. But we tried to mitigate that in the way we did the skirmish fight, in that you're not rolling for individual skirmish shots. What you're really rolling for is whether or not your skirmish screen stays out. And then if it's out, that has an impact for the rest of the turn in terms of the enemy's ability to close or how effective their fire is, or those kinds of things. So I broke the paradigm a little bit in that case, but I think we successfully mitigated. And we gave customers what they wanted, which was they wanted to see the skirmishers. And then somewhere in the middle of there was Santa Anna Rules, which was designed for the Mexican War, and the experimental or the new thing that I think I added there. And in fact, it wasn't completely a new idea. I got the idea from another local designer in Virginia, Ron Perlman, who came up with this notion of explicitly representing stragglers. When you read a lot of the historical accounts, particularly the American Civil War, they talk a lot about stragglers running off during the fight. And that had to happen in other periods, ancients and 7 Years' War and Napoleonic Wars, because that's why you had NCOs back there with spontoons ready to skewer people. But you don't read about it so much. But you read about it a lot in the American Civil War. Mm. And the Mexican War is, a rehearsal for the Civil War in terms of a lot of the commanders who later became generals. Yeah. So this notion of explicitly representing stragglers and not having a morale check, because we know that the majority of casualties in a unit are not actually dead, right? They're wounded or stragglers or ineffective in some other way. So in that set of rules, explicitly represented the notion of stragglers. And so there's no morale check per se, but when you have more stragglers in your unit than effectives, the unit retreats. So there's some mechanics in there that say, when you're shot from the rear or the flanks, you accrue stragglers faster than you accrue casualties. When you're in column, you accrue casualties faster than you do stragglers, to represent the sort of at least the gamer notion that there's greater cohesion when you're in a column. And and then I use those same mechanics with some modifications for Wellington rules. So then that brings me to we finished the Bury Yourself Valiantly, which is the fantasy, medieval, and ancients version of the Look Sarge No Charts family. And at the end of that project, which was a couple years long, it really started to feel like work, but I just needed to finish it. And so after that was over, I was looking for something that wouldn't be a collaborative effort, because collaboration is hard. It's good, but it's hard. And something just for me. So I went back to an early love, which was World War II Skirmish, and made a list of those things that I wanted to retain from Beer and Pretzel Skirmish, but there were things that I wanted to get rid of. So in Beer and Pretzel Skirmish, you have these order chips that you have to place on your units, and I never liked the aesthetic of that. So I was looking to do something new and different, and reached into things that I had seen in the past that I liked in terms of mechanics. And you have to be careful when you do that too. You don't want a new set of rules to just be a bag of mechanics, right? Because designing a set of rules is a bit like sculpting, I think. It's an artistic thing, and all of the systems have to work together, and I think they have to feel consistent, and they have to feel like part of a whole. If it feels just like a bag of disjointed mechanics, I think that sort of hurts the suspension of disbelief that goes on when you're playing the game. So, I'm always taking note of new mechanics and new ideas and new thoughts, and I have a notebook that I write that stuff down in. And then when it turns out that a historical period looks like it lends itself to some new mechanic or some new idea, then I'll reach into my bag of tricks and pull out something. And that brings me up to Combat Patrol. Probably took a lot longer to do that than you were hoping for. Sorry.
I was going to say, that's one hell of a back catalogue. Right, so Combat Patrol came out in May, doesn't it? And you've been working on it for a while, and it sounds as if you've taken the best of the things that you've had sort of evolve in, and you've taken some ideas, and you've come up with a really interesting system. I was watching your videos earlier today. We will put links up to the videos that you produced in the show notes, but they're really interesting. And I was really impressed by the activation system that which we'll come on to. But do you want to give us a very quick overview on the sort of game size that you were trying to do with Combat Patrol, and the sort of number of players that you think makes a good game?
The activation system, which, as you said, we'll talk about a little bit later, I think scales pretty well. I mean, we've used it in the Look Sarge family rules for games with 20 players. But so for Combat Patrol, though, I was trying to focus it on a game that would be interesting for a player who had maybe as many as 2 sections and as few as 1. Right? And so the idea is that a player is either a section leader or platoon leader, and maybe there's some attached weapons. And then, of course, you can have more than that. You could put a couple of platoons on one side if it's an attack scenario, and you want to give the attacker some advantage over the folks they're supposed to be attacking. But the idea is that it's kind of a platoon level game. Platoon, reinforced platoon, maybe a company on a side, and 3 to 4 players per side. Although, I've gotten emails from folks in England who are playing it, just 2 people, and they're playing with full platoons, and it seems to be moving quickly enough for them. So I don't think you have to have 6 players to play the game. Like I said, I've gotten emails from folks in England who have played it with just 2 players and seem to have a great time. But it was really designed for 6 to 8 players, and that sort of reflects my bias in that I like running games at conventions, and I don't. These days it seems hard to make a comparison without somebody forcing you into a value judgment, right? But shows in the U.S. and shows in England are a little bit different. And my only experience with a show, firsthand experience, was at Partisan in June, and I just had a great time. I thought it was a terrific show, and the guys did a wonderful job putting it on, and really, really had fun. And so I don't want to sound as if the U.S. model is better. It's just different than how our shows tend to be much more heavily weighted toward participation games and tournaments. than the notion of
the former is a trend that seems to be happening more and more in the UK, as I think you might have noticed at Partisan.
Partisan.
A good half of those games were participation, and certainly at the show we run, we encourage it to be considerably more than that.
So I don't think there's anything bad about the demonstration game, and there have been some articles lately in Miniature War Games and other things about but anyway, the here where I game mostly, the participation game is by far the most common, and so I gear games toward being able to put 6 or 8 people around a table. More than 6 or 8 becomes kind of an extravaganza, and it's fun to do once in a while. But as a game master, that can be a little tiring. But so 6 or 8 players is kind of the sweet spot for me. I think there's enough folks that around the table that there's some social interaction, and guys can tease each other about their bad die rolls and those kinds of things, but not so many that it becomes painful. So that's where I design for. That's my design target.
So would it be fair to say that for Combat Patrol, you tend to be looking at each player having 1 or 2 sections and maybe an attached unit with that? So 20, 25 men plus maybe a small vehicle.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good assessment.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I think we need to address the elephant in
the topic.
Yep. So Combat Patrol, the first thing I noticed is there's no dice, which I've noticed in a few games, and it's a nice mechanism. It's card based, and you've got 2 sets of cards. So you've got cards which are used for the activation, and then you've got cards which are used for pretty much everything else.
That's correct. Right. So there are a lot of card based activation games, right? And I believe that the first was probably Sword in the Flame. I don't know that to be true. Like Voltaire said, there's nothing new under the sun. But I believe that the first card-based activation game was Sword in the Flame. And but card-based activation schemes have some interesting ideas about friction and randomness and difficulty of controlling your units under fire, which I think is pretty accurate. But from a gaming perspective, they can sometimes be very frustrating, particularly if you don't get your card for 2 or 3 turns. So there have been some nuances to the basic scheme that Larry Braum put together, where Howard Whitehouse puts 2 reshuffle cards in the deck, and when the second one comes up, the turn is over. The stuff that Two Fat Lardies do, they have the tea break or something card in there.
It varies depending on what the rule set is called, but essentially, yes, they have 1 or 2 tea break cards.
So I think the notion that the turn should end early or could end early is really good, and so people have done that with, like I said, reshuffle cards or something. The challenge, though, is there's the opportunity in that case for you to go for several turns without anything to do. Which can be very, very frustrating. And I try not to offer an opinion about a set of rules until I've played it more than 3 times, But I have to say that my first experience with PK was so off-putting that I never played it again. And that was because I didn't take an action of my own decision for the entire game. So for 4 hours, anyway, so... Yeah. So in designing a card-based activation scheme, the intent was to try to capitalize on the advantages of such a scheme, if you believe there are advantages, and I do, while mitigating those disadvantages. So what did we do? So again, I'm designing rules generally for participation games with about 6 players, and so one of the challenges with card-based schemes is that one person is doing things while everybody else is watching. Not a lot of fun. So what a lot of game masters will do is they'll draw 2 or 3 cards so that 2 or 3 people can maybe do things at the same time. But then you run into, well, whose card came first? And okay, well, I know that he's coming next, so I'm going to change what I've done. And
I've done similar umpiring to Fat Lardies games. I think the standard trick is to peek at the next card and decide whether it's going to have any effect on what's happening at the moment. And if not, you can hand it out.
That's right. And so we play Frostgrave multiplayer, and that's kind of what we do. So if player 2 can go and it's not going to interfere with what player 1's doing, or player 1 what they're doing isn't going to, so they can go. And so we get 6 or 8 players around the table doing Frostgrave, doing kind of what you just described. So that's right. So that's what we came up with though was this idea of command dice. So you roll, every leader or commander or headquarters on the table rolls a 6-sided die, and you place that, and you re-roll that every turn. And I'll say why that's important later. But you lay that out against all your leaders, and then I draw from a deck of cards which is numbered 1 through 6. And in fact, there's 2 of each number in the deck, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea then is I draw a 2, and everybody around the table who has a 2 gets to go. So there are fewer occasions in which one person is doing something and 6 people are watching. Because when you have, in the case of Combat Patrol, 2 sections, that's 4 teams. So often one of the command dice for one of your 4 teams, or one or more of your 4 teams, because they could have the same number randomly, gets to do something. And so the time you spent standing around, or, okay, my turn's over, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee and come back in 25 minutes because that's when I'll get a chance to go again, right? So we try to mitigate that. And there are black and red cards, and that has to do with morale, actually. So there's this notion of a unit, could be a team in Combat Patrol or a company or something in the LuxArts series of rules, can be in a status called pinned. And when you're pinned, there are no restrictions on what you can do, but you only get to do them on the black cards. So you're half as effective on average. Right now, that's of course dependent on when the reroll and reshuffle card comes up. But so there's still 2 drawbacks to card-based systems, right? So one is that I might never get to go. And so the way we've handled that is there's an optional rule that there are 2 optional rules, and you can choose one of the 2 if you wish. The first one is to take the reshuffle card out of the deck, which means that everybody's going to get to go, but the order is still randomized. The other option is we have these chits that are assigned to a side, 2 or 3. And so if you draw the reshuffle card, ending the turn early, but some number on the cards never came up, so the 5 was never drawn, one of the commanders, one from each side, can use one of these chips to draw that card forward of the reshuffle card. So everybody who then has a 5 gets to go. So it stops that case where, your key unit doesn't get to go for 3 turns and your whole plan is unhinged, right? It could still happen, but it's significantly less likely. And when it does happen, it's not necessarily an ahistorical result. It's just not necessarily fun from a gaming perspective. So, I think we've tried to address, I think successfully, all those things that are irritants for folks who don't like card-based systems, while still retaining the friction and the randomness. So, and as you mentioned, there's an example of that as a little video that I posted to YouTube.
I was just going to say, there's also a very nice feature where you can swap dice in the unit. So if you've got a section commander with obviously a couple of fire teams below him, they've all got dice for each of the fire teams in the commander, and if the commander's card comes up, he can swap it with one of the fire teams, which means that you can sort of twist it around a little bit, but obviously keeping that company, also that sort of command level in place. And that's quite an interesting little mechanic.
Yeah, so, right. Well, I'm glad you think so. So, the other thing we add, I have a third color. So there's black and red, which we talked about, but there's also a third color of cards in Combat Patrol. They're blue, and it's used for handicapping. So if you're doing a scenario in which the Poles are on a counterattack and they're doing, and in this particular battle you're representing, they were pretty aggressive and things, you can add 1 or 2 cards into the deck that only apply to that side. So, the blue 4 comes up, and you typically never put more than 3 in a deck, but the blue 4 comes up, and so Polish units with a 4 get to go, but not the German units with a 4. So there's a way to sort of represent at the kind of army level or the unit level this idea that some units have better command and control than others. And then in Combat Patrol, we also added 2 other cards, which is a green card and an elite card. And so units in combat patrol come in 3 guts levels, right? Or guts or morale, green, regular, and elite. And so when the elite card is drawn, you look back at the last number, and any elite units across the table get to go again. And when the green card comes up, you draw the next card off the deck and say it's a 3. Everybody gets to go everybody who's a 3 gets to go except green units. So again, it represents, on average, that will be meaningful 2 or 3 times in a game, but those 2 or 3 times are sometimes important and critical. So you get that notion that elite units generally are a little more effective than regular units, and regular units are more effective than green units. So all of that is built into the card system without the need for charts and chits and all these other things, right? It just kind of happens.
Just a couple of things. We're all activation system junkies around here.
Yeah.
I think all of us, have soft spots. One of the things I found with card over dice-based activation is, there's 2 comments here. One is there's a bit of a psychological thing with cards, in that somehow, because you're rolling dice, not activating units is your fault, and it becomes for some reason, for me certainly, it becomes considerably more frustrating than something like Bolt Action or Hail Caesar or Blitzkrieg Commander, where I can't activate a unit because I can't roll dice, whereas the random fate of the umpire turning up a card feels somehow much less painful.
Yeah, so that's a valid perspective, right? There are people who are just not going to like card-based activation. There are people who like I go, you go. So yeah, I understand. I don't know how to address that, right? I mean,
don't use dice.
I've tried to address as many drawbacks to card-based activation I can without losing what makes card-based activation interesting. And I've played dice-based activation schemes and liked them. So it's not like those are bad. I've played I Go, You Go games and liked them. I think the activation scheme is, like I said earlier when I made the allusion to sculpting, the activation scheme has to fit with the whole feel of the system, right? They have to fit together. And in this case, I think if you use dice-based activation when everything else is on the cards, that would be a little bit jarring. And in fact, I did get a comment about that. We used the spotting system for combat patrol, which is an optional rule. Some folks in England felt a little bolted on because it did require dice, and so I've actually changed that recently. I published a supplement, a free supplement you can download that provides an alternative spotting system that doesn't need dice. So, yeah, I agree with you. The fact that my fate is not entirely in my hands, I can see why that frustrates folks, but I don't know how to address it.
So, you mentioned earlier that you were going to say, well, as far as the activation system is concerned, you had both cards and dice. Why both?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to that. So, if you just use the cards, right, and there are some fine sets of rules that just use cards, right? If you just use cards, then if let's say I gave everybody a number and they kept that number through the whole game, right? I would know that I could do card counting, and I could say, well, the 5 hasn't come up yet, so these guys are likely to come up next, or I could do some of those kinds of things, or know that all the 5s are going to come up at the same time, which means this is going to happen, right? So you roll the 6-sided dice so that the same units don't have the same number from turn to turn, right? So if you had a 5 and I had a 5 with units that were facing each other this turn, next turn you might have a 3 and I might have a 4, and the results are going to be a little bit different. So you need, and it's talked about in the rules a little bit, but you really need both sets of randomness to achieve the effect I was looking for. And so the cards change up the sequence of activation. The dice change up who activates simultaneously.
Right.
It's a very neat system. I was just watching it thinking, that works. And it's quite nice because obviously when the card comes up and you activate a fighter team or or leader with his support, you then have a different set of cards which basically dictates the effects of what they want to do.
Right. So when a team, and that could be a machine gun team, mortar team, a rifle team, or when a team activates, and they activate when the card drawn matches the number on the 6-sided die associated with their leader. When a team activates, each figure in that team is allowed to do generally one thing. But they don't all have to do the same thing, and the sequencing is up to the players. So if I had a team of 4, for instance, I could have 2 guys shoot and 2 guys advance, and I could do that in whatever order I wanted. So I could have the guys advance to kind of get out of the way and then shoot, or I could shoot to maybe soften up the enemy and then advance. So the player has control over that. But a figure can generally only do one thing, and that's either shoot, move, reload his weapon, or unstun. Maybe set up a weapon. There's a handful of things. So, right. So I also am a big fan of randomized movement in that, our tables tend to be flat when we know that terrain, and I've walked over a fair amount of it, both in the Army and with scouts, that it's never flat. And so how fast it takes you to move a given length as the crow flies can vary a lot over time. So you draw a card and you look at a section of the card, and it tells you how fast you get to move that turn. Now, before I go too much farther along that path, let me say that a figure has 5 attributes, and it spells gamer, and that was kind of a joke at first, but that mnemonic helps me remember it. So guts is morale, G. Accuracy is for shooting or throwing things. Melee is for hand-to-hand combat. Endurance is essentially how many hit points or wounds a figure can take before he's incapacitated. And I use the term incapacitated instead of killed because often folks are out of the fight but are not killed. They're just out of this fight. And then reaction, which is your ability to interrupt what the other player's doing. So I'm going to flip a card for movement, and I'm going to look on the movement section of the card for my guts rating or my morale, which is I like to try to separate morale and training because I think they're different, but in this case it was just easy to keep them together. So you look at your guts rating, and that tells you how many inches you get to move that turn. So that's how movement works. And if you're wounded, you move at half speed, and then there's some terrain effects. And a unit record is a one little 3-inch by 5-inch card, and on the back of that it has some movement modifiers, like what it takes to move through a window or a door or up a slope or those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. When you want to shoot, for each figure who's shooting, and there's an example of this on the YouTube video, you flip a card and you begin in the little hit locator at the top of the card by looking at the accuracy rating of the shooter, which can be, again, elite, regular, or green. And what you're looking for across the top of the card is a bullet hole. There are black circles which represent misses, and there are bullet holes, and you look over your accuracy rating, elite, regular, or green, to see if there's a bullet hole. But there are also modifiers to that. So if the target's moving, or if my leader's not helping direct fire, or I'm wounded, or the target's at medium range, I shift one bubble to the right. And if the shooter's moving, or the target's at long range, I shift 2 bubbles to the left, and they're cumulative. So, a wounded figure at long range would be 3 shifts. And if after I do that shifting, where I end up still has a bullet hole versus a black circle, then I get a hit. Now, in designing this, I actually had a bunch of charts as if they would go on a chart card, and then broke those apart and put them, different rows and columns from these charts onto the cards. So flipping a card, really, I flip a card and I read the result, but that really represents a couple of steps in a traditional game, right? What's my chance to hit? Okay, roll some dice. Did I hit? Apply some modifiers, right? And So, and looking things up on a chart. So all of that is handled by a single card flip. And I flip it over, and that represents the die roll and table lookup and all those things. So that tends to go pretty fast. And then if I get a hit, I flip the next card, and that tells me if the figure was wounded or incapacitated. And here's the part that's really kind of unique, and that is that notice that when I was talking about modifiers to the chance of hitting, cover wasn't mentioned, right? So, but cover matters a lot. And I my feeling on this is that cover is something that should be made explicit, right? So when Dungeons and Dragons was very popular, I played a similar game called Tunnels and Trolls. And in Tunnels and Trolls, if you're wearing armor, it actually deducts from the amount of damage you should have taken, which to me, mathematically, they're exactly the same, right? It changes your chance to be hit, or it deducts from the damage. Mathematically, I can make them identical. But there's something intuitive about this idea that, you know, I should have been hit by this bullet, but it hit the tree I was hiding behind instead, right? So now explicitly, I know that that tree helped me, right? Not that the accrued modifiers made it harder for me to hit and the target and the shooter missed, but that the tree stopped me from taking a wound.
Yeah.
Or the rock or the wall or whatever. And so and when I'm thinking about a skirmish game, right, I was trying to say, how do I get to that? Which is almost kind of a role-playing feel to it without gunking it up. And so what I came up with is, so you roll and you don't roll. You flip a card and it tells you which figure in the target area was hit, whether he was wounded or incapacitated. And then there might be some cover icons. So if it happens that the figure that was randomly selected to be the guy who was hit is behind the cover icon, behind the cover indicated by one of those icons, then he's protected by that cover. And instead of being wounded or incapacitated, he ducks back and he's stunned. So he has to spend the next turn on stunning himself before he can do things. So there's a couple of things going on there. So the first thing is I don't get to pick my target. I'm firing into an area. The guys in the woods, the guys in the building, the guys behind the wall. And this gets to what I said earlier about rate and distribution fire being hard. And so the player doesn't necessarily get to pick that only the guys with the key weapons on the radio are the guys my people are shooting at, right? Because that's just not the way I think it works on a battlefield. So I randomly select who gets hit and whether it's a wound or an incapacitation. And by the way, multiple wounds add up, and when the number of wounds I've taken equals my endurance, then I'm incapacitated, the endurance attribute. And then cover, which is represented explicitly, which I think is really kind of neat. And so I remember when I was running a demonstration game of the rules at Partisan in June, I was showing guys how to do this, and a couple of guys in the game were flipping cards and they were doing their things, and they looked up, and I was girding myself for the, wow, this is really silly kind of comment. But instead, the guy looked up at me and he said, wow, this is really dead simple. And that was kind of rewarding. But so 2 flips of a card, and I can determine, at most 2 flips of a card, I can determine if a shooter hit his target and what the effect was. And of course, if you're wounded, you're also stunned. And if somebody is wounded or stunned, then the unit leader accrues a morale pip, which is used in the morale phase to determine things about the unit. So what was unique about the shooting, besides the fact that it's all done with cards, is the fact that cover is represented explicitly. And that's not better than representing cover as a modifier, but I feel like it's more intuitive, right? And it just feels somehow better to me, even though, like I said, mathematically it's identical to other systems.
And of course, it also caters for those situations in a game where you end up with a unit that is in mixed cover.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, that's exactly right. So, the problem that I had with Beer and Pretzel Skirmish, right? So the Army tends to have a lot of lessons experienced and very few lessons learned. But the thing I learned with Beer and Pretzel Skirmish was, because I used area of fire for that as well, but there was always this business about, well, is half the unit in cover, so should I get the modifier or not? So in this case, you don't have to do that, because I could be firing at an area where 2 guys are behind a rock and 3 guys are behind a wall and 1 guy's in a foxhole. And I don't have to try to adjudicate, well, is that mostly cover or mostly not cover? And as you said, right, I'm worrying, I can handle mixed cover because it's the figure who's hit that I care about. And I only care if the cover icon on the card matches the cover that figure is in. So I think it made it simpler too.
I suppose that's the thing that's going to affect the scalability, is because everything in the activations is done by individual figure. That's great when you've got sort of 20 figures and, okay, in a squad you're activating 6 or 8 of them. So you can do it quite quickly, flip over the cards. But obviously when you start getting to bigger scales, it's going to slow down. So I can see why you sort of say each player will have sort of, 20 figures. So if you wanted to do a full company, do it with 2 players, and they each do their own.
Yeah, I think you're right. And now scalability is really along 2 different axes, right? So there's scalability in terms of a player's span of control, and that gets to exactly the point that you made, right? When I have too many figures to try to resolve actions for, then that can slow things down a bit. Right? So for instance, one of my buddies has applied this to World War I, and World War I squads didn't have a lot of team leaders and things, right? It turned, it was kind of a really big squad. And so the game can bog down a little bit when you have a squad of 14 guys who all have to be resolved at the same time. But the other dimension of scalability beyond a player's span of control is how many players you can have. And so I think that the activation system in Combat Patrol scales to many players. So you can create a bigger game by adding players. And I think that works better than by adding an extra section to every player, for instance, right? So because you're using the dice and the cards, all the 6s around the table, whether there are 20 players or 4 players, all the 6s go at the same time. So I think the activation system scales to lots of players. I think you're right that having to deal with what every figure is doing when I activate necessarily limits the span of control for a player to about 2 sections or 4 teams and maybe a vehicle or 2. Beyond that, I think it does get to be cumbersome.
Yeah, but with these player decks, these cards that you use for handling hits, movements, combat effects, cover effects, they also cover vehicles and when you're attacking vehicles. So there's an awful lot of information going on to these, and I did quite like the vehicle rules. They are a bit in depth. So I don't think you would play this game with 20 tanks because it'd take a while. But at the level of game, you're only going to have 1 or 2 vehicles on there. So it's quite good that you've gone into quite a lot of detail on how the vehicles themselves are used. Do you want to sort of talk around a little bit on how fire against vehicles and carried out?
Thanks for the comment there. I think, So, again, thinking about span of control, if a player has 2 vehicles and 1 die roll and the vehicle is knocked out, that's not very satisfying, right? So I wanted there to be a little bit of detail associated with how the vehicles work. So generally the vehicles, as you said, they take a little bit longer, and you wouldn't want to do Kursk, right? But so you flip a card to get a hit, just like I described earlier. You're looking for a bullet hole as opposed to a black circle. But the next card flip doesn't tell you that the vehicle is incapacitated. The next card flip gives you look in a little icon on the card, and it tells you where you hit the vehicle. So the body, the treads, the turret, the main gun. And then the player tells you how much armor he has in that location. And you flip a card and consult a 10-sided die icon that's on the card. And you take that 10-sided die, add that to the penetration of your weapon at a given range, and compare that against the armor value of the vehicle where you hit it. And if the modified penetration, right, the die roll, quote unquote, the 10-sided die on the card, and the plus your penetration number exceeds the armor value, then the round penetrated. And you roll to see if you blew up the vehicle and accrued casualties or those kinds of things. But also written on the card, under the little icon that tells you where the vehicle was hit, is the effect if the round doesn't penetrate. So I don't need to do another table lookup or something. And those are related to the location. So I don't hit the guy in the treads and then find out I knocked out the weapon by rolling randomly on a table or something. So I'm looking at a card here where it's the lower body, and the non-penetrating hit result says it's a mobility kill. So that's how vehicle works. And then there are times when you use the cover icons to if the vehicle's hull down or some of those kinds of things. But that's generally how vehicle combat works. I will tell you that in a lot of games, the players I've seen, because sometimes, when you're designing a set of rules, at first you're there game mastering and running the rules and explaining things, but there's a point as the designer where you need to step back and watch other people play it without you, and or send copies of the rules to somebody you don't know and ask them to play test it and provide comments. But as I sat back and I watched people play the game, I see that most of the time the players don't want to worry about whether or not the crew bails out, and you can certainly skip that step, right? It's a pretty rare instance in which a crew bailed out of a tank and then participated in the fight after that, right? Typically they would, they'll run for cover so that they can reman a tank in the next fight. So it's a legitimate legitimate thing to just skip that step, but it's there if you want it.
The other thing I didn't pick up with from watching the videos was how morale works. I see how figures were getting incapacitated, how they were being stunned, which basically stops them from reacting the next turn. But what about sort of a higher level morale? Have you got rules in there for that?
Well, so there is morale at the section or the team level. And so when a figure in a team is wounded or incapacitated, the team leader accrues a morale marker. And now a figure could be hit twice in the same activation, in which case the team leader is going to pick up 2 morale markers. And I didn't try to make a distinction between an incapacitation versus a wound. To some extent, I think it's so situation dependent, right? I mean, you could hit a guy and he just dies, or you can hit a guy and wound him and he's screaming, and which one is harder on morale, right? So I chose not to represent that. So a wound or an incapacitation accrues a morale marker. Now, the other nuance, right? So we talked about cover. So if a figure was supposed to have been wounded, but he was protected by the tree or wall he was hiding behind, he's just stunned instead, he ducks back, but the leader still accrues a morale marker because he should have been wounded. And the notion there is that the unit's receiving effective fire, which tends to have a detrimental effect on your morale. So then the next time that unit activates through the activation mechanisms that we've talked about, the team leader, before any of his guys can do stuff, the team leader has to make 1 morale check for every one of those morale markers he's accrued. So, and I do that by, again, flipping a card and looking at a different section of the card, the bottom third. And there are morale results there. And some of them have different results if you're in cover or not. And so this gets to kind of a philosophical argument, and that is that I believe that a morale failure is not so much, it can be that everybody gets up and runs, and there's a result like that. But I think a morale failure is more gradual than that. It's the sort of this deleterious effect where people stop doing what you want them to do, right? And you lose cohesion and control. And so a lot of the morale effects are things like a guy becomes stunned, or one of the guys in the unit runs to the next piece of cover, or because it's also meant to be a little bit cinematic, one guy stands up and yells something and runs toward the enemy, because he's going to bayonet him because he killed his brother. So the morale effects tend to be a loss of cohesion, right? Units start doing crazy things, and then the leader has to spend some time sort of bringing them back under control, and those are times when he's not directing fire, and so there's then a benefit.
So it's actually a bit of an abstraction, but actually quite an obvious and reasonable one, in that you're covering a number of possible reactions to coming under fire under I'm not doing quite what the boss wants me to do.
That's right. So when a figure is stunned, and sometimes the whole unit gets stunned, right? So basically that's a loss of a turn. And the thought there is that the leader's trying to rally everybody and get everybody back under control. And so he's trying to get everybody back up out of their holes or out from behind their rocks so they can fire at the enemy. But yeah, I mean, when a figure gets a stun result, as part of the morale check, that's a guy who's thinking about self-preservation for a while, right? And the leader, somebody's got to do something to get him back into the fight. It could be him doing it himself. It could be the leader. And so the idea that, I mean, I think our record is when a guy activated, I think he had 12 morale markers to work off. And when you get 12 morale markers and you're making 12 morale checks, they still go pretty fast because you just flip 12 cards and read the results. But you'll get, some guys run off for cover, another guy does another thing, some guys stun themselves. There's also a result in there that says worse than we thought, so a random wounded figure dies of wounds. There's, leader gets struck by a stray round. So there's all kinds of results in there. And I think the feel is about right. The units just really, a unit under effective fire really just starts to lose cohesion, and it becomes very, very difficult for the player to get those guys to do something in an organized way until he can bring another team in or drop some smoke or whatever and relieve some of the pressure off that unit. And I think that feels right. There are people who think that, they get to the morale phase and they have to draw 3 or 4 cards and that slows things down. I haven't seen it watching other people play it, but I can understand the concern.
All right, so we've had a very good overview of how the rules work, and they are very different to anything I've seen before.
Got me quite keen to actually try them out.
Yeah. You've got a website which has got some great resources on it, and again, we will give links to this. Some of the stuff I've noticed, obviously we've got the video demonstrations, which are well worth having a read through. And you got lots of downloads of some of the files you need, the sort of vehicle crew layouts, all that stuff. But you've also got unit organizations, which I'm just flicking through now, and they're really nicely put together and basically describe how companies from the different forces that took part in World War II are actually laid out. It's a really, really good set of stuff, and I can hear Mike typing away frantically trying to get to him.
No, you can't. I've got my microphone on mute.
I could hear somebody typing. But no, they're well worth having a look at. I mean, even if you don't want to play Combat Patrol, but just to look at them, if you're interested in World War II, it's really, really good resources.
Oh, thanks.
But the other thing that's just caught my eye is the Falkland Islands.
Oh, that's only just come out.
Yeah.
So when I went to this card-based idea, right? So initially, I designed Combat Patrol for me. I had no intention to publish it. Like I said, it was meant to be a break after Bury Yourself Valiantly. I just needed a break, and I needed something where I could just fiddle with ideas that I just wanted to fiddle with without worrying about whether or not they would be well received or whether or not people would like it. So, but after a while, when I started bringing it to club night, guys kept saying, "Oh, you really need to publish this thing." Well, all right. So then I started looking at printing of cards from print-on-demand places, and I felt like, with a couple of markups between folks, that the price was going to get sort of heavy. And so the thought was, hey, I'm asking people to spend cash on 4 decks of cards plus 4 action decks and activation deck, and that's pretty pricey. So I would make almost everything else free. So the full copy of the rules, I think, is a $5 download from RPG Now, which I don't know what the exchange rate is. I think that's 2 farthings on a groat or something. So that's meant to be reasonably inexpensive, and it's because it's in full color. I wanted to do it as a PDF. So the intent for Combat Patrol was that everything would be through a web page, right? You would order the cards through RPG Now, you would download the PDF of the rules, and then any other supplements and things would be a download off the website. Now, what we found was that worked great in the US, but with VAT and everything else, the cost of printing a deck of cards and shipping it to the UK or Europe was really prohibitive. So that's when I sought a printer and a distributor in the UK, but which is Sally Forth. But we So there's a lot of supplemental material up on the webpage that I think is useful even if you don't like Combat Patrol. So as you mentioned, there's the order of battle information, and my guess is that an expert on the Dutch in 1940 can probably nitpick something about the order of battle, but it's meant to be a starting point or departure point, and it's meant to represent kind of the consensus view from a number of sources. And I think there's some really neat things in there, and things that I learned just putting the charts together, right? Like what does a Polish platoon look like in 1939? But there are also these other supplements, and there's play aids and things that you mentioned, but there's also these other supplements. So I mentioned earlier that, one of the guys in my club is doing, World War I with Combat Patrol. And I always had it in my mind that I wanted to do some science fiction gaming using Combat Patrol, and I've been collecting figures from Pig Iron and other folks. And eventually I'll get to do that. If you go to my blog, you can see some early games where I played some science fiction with Combat Patrol. But you mentioned the Falklands, and so I, know a little something about the Falklands, but I wouldn't consider myself anything like an expert. But we have a guy in the club who was really interested in that, and I asked him to put that supplement together. So I think it's really helpful for somebody who wants to game the Falklands, even if you don't want to use Combat Patrol, because there's some weapons information and some order of battle and some optional rules that you could apply those optional rules or find similar optional rules in whatever system you play. But the idea behind these supplements is that they're going to be 4 or 5 pages. The Falkland ones is 10, I think, because there's 6 or 7 pages of unit organization charts. 4 or 5 pages with some special rules that provide theater, campaign, or period flavor. So the first one I did was the Winter War, because I've always been interested in the Winter War, and there's some interesting little rules in there. And then in the UK, you guys have really come up with some clever ideas. One of which was the Very British Civil War, and the other one recently was it Winter of '79. And so somebody asked me, "Hey, I'm doing Winter of '79 stuff. How would I do that with Combat Patrol?" So I put together a supplement for that, and then we did the Falkland one. There's some other ones coming. The same guy who did the Falkland one is a crazy nut for Star Wars things, right? For me, I like episodes 4, 5, and 6, but I can't tell you the nomenclature of every weapon and those kinds of things. But he's actually pulling together a supplement for Star Wars. I think there'll end up being 2. There'll be one for sort of the classic trilogy and one for the Clone Wars. And the neat thing about that is you don't need any of the body armor rules that are in the optional rules supplement, because body armor doesn't seem to have any effect in the Star Wars world. In fact, it seems to make stormtroopers more vulnerable somehow.
I'm sure you can work in a special rule for that somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. I've been working.
Isn't it a case of whatever card you draw, stormtroopers always miss?
So, in fact, there is an optional rule that makes I think stormtroopers automatically get 1 shift to the right, I think. Anyway, he's still working on it. It's still under development. But we also have a rule that says when you're firing at any of the main characters, the named characters in the movies or the books, whether you're a rebel or a stormtrooper, there's 1 shift to the right to make it harder to hit those guys. And then typically a figure's endurance in the game, if you're playing to do something historical, is a 3, and an incapacitation result equals 3 wounds. A lot of your heroes, Luke Skywalker, they might have an endurance of 6 or 7, right, to get the right feel. Anyway, all that's still under development. I've been working on a supplement for quite some time. And the reason that all the supplements are free is because I feel like you already had to pay enough money to get the cards. It works better if every player has an action deck of their own. You don't strictly need that. And so you're paying, I don't know what they cost in the UK, 30.
Have you considered an iPhone app for the cards?
Actually, we are.
Excellent.
So I don't know how long that'll take. A friend of mine already did it on an Android when I was in pre-publication.
Sweet.
And I've been programming with an environment. Maybe I shouldn't do an ad, but I've been programming in an environment that lets you write the code once in C# and something called XAML, and then compile it to Windows phones.
We use something very similar at work for mobile apps. It makes life much easier.
So, I wouldn't. So I can compile to Android, iOS, or Windows phones. And in fact, we're using that environment for something I'm doing at work to help train guys in Jumpmaster School. But so I wouldn't want to do a first-person shooter in that kind of a platform-independent programming environment, but this kind of thing where you're just putting up pictures. So that'll come. I just don't know how long it'll take for that to come. Because what I'm working on now is something I've been working on for a few months, which is a supplement for the Pacific. And boy, the Pacific is hard because, there's this Hollywood notion that Japanese never run away and never surrendered, but it's not strictly true. And it certainly isn't true when you look at fighting against the Chinese or China, Burma, India, or some of the earlier campaigns. And while some of those stereotypes kind of fit the Marines with flamethrowers rooting stereotype. So anyway, the Pacific is really hard. And the other thing that was hard was the normal morale results, which, as we talked about earlier, stress this idea that a morale failure is this sort of gradual reduction in combat power as guys stop doing what you want them to do. When I read accounts of fighting in the Pacific, particularly again in the South Pacific and the island hopping and stuff, it appears that Japanese morale results should be more useful than to not bug out into the jungle. Right? So the challenge there is, how do you represent morale that feels uniquely Japanese? And of course, you have rules for things like bonsai charges and suicide attacks on tanks and those kinds of things. But the real bugaboo has been morale. And so I actually had my artist, who works in British Columbia, in Canada, I had him design another set of cards for me that 3/4 of the card is exactly the same as all the other cards. And then I will add different text to them that has uniquely Japanese morale. So there'll be a set will have 2 action decks. So I guess if you have 5 or 6 Japanese players, you might have to buy more than one set. But the only thing that's different about the cards, everything else plays the same. The only thing that's really different about the cards is the morale result. Now, again, I said I already felt like people paid enough money to get the cards, and I don't want to be sort of in this mode of trying to milk people for every penny they've got. So what I've done what I'm going to do with the Japanese supplement is there's actually a table. Every card in the action deck has a unique serial number. And I can look at a card and tell you what deck it came from and what card it is within that deck. So there's actually a table that's going to be in the supplement where you can, when you flip the morale card, you can actually look up that serial number in the table, and you can read the uniquely Japanese morale. So if you don't want to buy the Japanese cards, I think most people who play a lot of South Pacific will want to, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. You can just download the supplement for free and then take this extra step to look up the serial number and get the Japanese morale results. So that's coming. I'm not quite happy with the morale yet, and because that's going to be printed on the cards and I can't change it like you can a PDF file, I've got to make sure that's right. So that'll probably be still some time off before that gets published.
Okay, I mean, you are giving away quite a lot of stuff on your site. Let's talk about people being able to buy stuff. So in the UK, Sally Forth is distributing the rules for you.
Yes. In fact, more than that, actually, because they actually print the cards in the UK. They have their own printer. So they print and distribute them. And actually, maybe I shouldn't say this, but the UK version of the rules I actually like better than the US version because the cards come in this really neat tin box.
It's really cool. It is.
And when I order them in the US, I get an envelope, right, with some cards in it. So I really think the presentation's nice, and it does give you a place to store the cards, between games. And Sally Forth talked me into. Remember, my intent initially was all digital, but he convinced me that people would actually want a printed book instead of just downloading a PDF, and so you can actually get a book, the printed full rule book through Sally Forth, and actually in the U.S. through On Military Matters, you can get a printed book, and I don't think you can actually order just the book. Maybe you can, but what you can order, I think you can. But
yes,
what you can also order is a starter set, which has 2 action decks, and they're unique in terms of the back the back of every action deck has a different color so that players can keep them apart during a game. Because if you start mixing up the cards, you start screwing up the probabilities of different results. That I tried to be diligent, careful about designing. So
each individual action deck has the same cards in it, doesn't it? But you have different sets of activation decks, don't you?
So every action deck is exactly the same on the front side. The only thing that's different is really the back, and they're different colors. The starter set, if you order a set of cards through either Sally Forth or through On Military Matters or Drive Through RPG or War Games Vault, right? You get 4 action decks and an activation deck. And there's a set A and a set B. And so if you got both set A and set B, you'd get 8 different backs for action decks. So again, my sweet spot is 6 to 8 players. You'd end up with an extra activation deck that you could use for when the activation deck wears out, or use it in some other game. Apply the activation system to some other set of rules you like. The starter set gives you 2 more action decks of different colors and an activation deck, because while you could strictly play the game with, you could surrogate the action deck or the activation deck with a deck of playing cards, right? It comes with that too. So the idea here behind the instructional videos and the starter set, and you can download a PDF of the basic rules without buying anything. The full set of rules cost you $5 or whatever the equivalent is in the UK.
About £4.
Yeah.
Given our pathetic exchange rate at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, whatever. So the idea behind the instructional videos, and you can read the rules first, and some of the other downloads off the website were so that before somebody spent $35 or whatever it is for the cards, you have a pretty fair idea that you like the concepts and the idea before you spend your money. So the idea was to kind of fly before you buy. So, and I think that's been reasonably successful, right? The game's actually been a lot more popular, and I've sold a lot more of them than I thought when I set out to just design a set of rules that would make me happy.
So, if you want the prices, if you just want the rule book from Sally Forth, it's £12. If you want the starter set, which as Buck said is the rules, 2 sets of the card decks plus the activation deck, that's £28. And then if you want to go big, the set A, which is 4 action decks plus the activation deck, is only £22.50. They also do all tokens and all sorts of wonderful things. So
it's pretty much on a par price-wise with shelling out for Sharp Practice or Chain of Command or other rules of a similar scale and size.
Muskets and Tomahawks, those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was the intent, was to not price it too hard. And that's why I was really, I think it was on the War Games website. Anyway, somebody hit me pretty hard early in one of the reviews about how expensive it was in the UK, and I couldn't figure it out. And that's when I realized that it was really the shipping and the VAT that was causing it to be cost prohibitive in the UK.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So I reached out to find somebody.
Great stuff. We have a question for you from one of our listeners.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
Ooh.
He's actually a mate of mine, and he asked me last week. All right, so this is from...
It was live. I was wondering how you were doing that. You have your own targets.
Yeah. So this is from my mate Ty Callahan Jones. Right, he is a big fan of the LuxArge rules. I wanted to know, are you planning to release a Lace Wars version of LuxArge?
It's funny he says that. We actually have been talking about... So, one of the guys in the club always does whatever he games in a scale that nobody else does. So, he does something called Not Quite 7 Years War with 54 millimeter home cast semi-round figures. Right? And it's really impressive on the table. We've been thinking about actually a LuxArge system for that period, right? I not exactly sure where yet, right? Whether that's going to be 7 Years War, whether that's going to be maybe earlier Pike and Shot, like English Civil War, that kind of thing. I just don't know. We've actually been talking about it. But the next one in the series is going to be near future sci-fi. And a lot of near future sci-fi games, particularly at the operational level, or the tend to feel like World War II with lasers. And so trying to do a couple of things that are a little bit unique there. One of the things is, so between turns, there's a cyber phase. And so the different forces have different cyber teams that they allocate to attack and defense. And you're using those teams to try to break into the enemy's networks. And as you're successful, you get to draw a cyber effects card that you can use during the turn to interfere with enemy command and control, or interfere with their spotting, or take over their unmanned vehicles and make them crash, or those kinds of things. So I think it'll feel, between the cyber phase and some other things we're doing with it, I think it'll feel different than just the World War II game with different figures. But that's next. So Lace Wars is in the pipeline probably, and also we've looked at maybe doing Victorian science fiction with Luxar's no charts. So you could really do big, Imperial powers fighting over the canals of Mars kinds of games if you wanted to.
I suppose it means we have to get you back sometime to talk about the Luxar shows then.
Oh, the tragedy.
Well, this has been enjoyable for me. I hope that Meeples and Miniatures doesn't go under, because none of your listeners like this one. But I'd love to come back at a time convenient for you guys. I'm really happy we were able to make it work out. This has been fun.
No, it has been great to chat. But thank you so much for coming on the show. So I know we were meant to do this a few months ago originally. Obviously, a bit nearer the time when they will also come out. But as I say, the other thing is it's now given us the opportunity to look things over more, and also, we now see a lot more of a direction of where you're taking the rules, and obviously the supplements that you're bringing out and everything. Do you see it as something that you'll continue to bring extra supplements out as you go along, or is it one of these things you're kind of going, okay, right, fine, we're going to do a finite number, and then we'll just see where it goes?
No, so I don't think there's a finite number. I'm kind of going to let the customers kind of drive that, right? So, I would like to I'm doing the South Pacific one, or the Pacific. I don't know if it'll be just South Pacific, or it'll include, China, Burma, India, that kind of thing as well. Mm-hmm. And that'll probably be the hardest one, because it requires some new cards. But, I know I want to do science fiction, so that I'm sure there'll be a science fiction supplement. And it may be that there's one that's kind of pulpy and one that's more serious. I'd like to do fighting in the Philippines, like the Moros and that kind of, so early, like, post-Spanish American Wars things. But basically, I'm going to let the players decide where they want to go. So if somebody wrote me, if I had two people send me an email that said, I like your Winter War one, but I'd really like to see a France 40 supplement, or I'd really like to see Chindits, I'm happy to go where players want to go. I mean, my intent isn't to constrain people as much as to take a lot of people's good ideas and kind of assimilate those and package them in a way that's consistent with the system and the flavor and the feel, so that it's not jarring when you so. And in fact, I'm actually really open to this idea that some of the supplements wouldn't come from me, right? I mean, I'd be really, if somebody, said, hey, I really want to do a very British Civil War supplement because that's what I game, I'd be happy to work with somebody on that. And what I've done in the past is, they come up with a lot of the ideas, and then I do the final formatting to give them that Combat Patrol look and provide editorial support and those kinds of things. And so, so there's not a finite number. As there's interest and people play the game and they want to take it in different directions, I'm happy to go along with them. Right? I'll go in some directions because I have an interest in those directions, and I'll go in other directions because the community wants me to. And that's why I actually started on the specific one. I had a couple of guys on the miniatures page send me notes saying, hey, I'm doing this stuff for the Pacific, and I'm having to make these kind of changes because it doesn't feel very Japanesey. And that got me thinking, and I said, well, I probably need to do a supplement so that if somebody does the Pacific, they kind of do it the Combat Patrol way, and it doesn't feel like kind of a bolt-on. So.
Right. Well, I think you might have a couple of people here who might be interested in a Vietnam version somewhere along the line. What do you think, Hobbsy?
So there actually is somebody on the miniatures page who actually sent me some notes about them using Combat Patrol for Vietnam. Then they kind of fell off the radar, so I don't know if they decided it wasn't going to work for them, or they decided what we talked about in email was sufficient and they're having fun. I don't know. But yeah, Vietnam I think would be really kind of fun, right? And Vietnam's the kind of thing where it's probably a couple of supplements, right? Because there's different aspects, and I Corps was different than 2 Corps, which is different than 4 Corps. And you probably want to represent, up in the north there were some tank battles. I don't know that there were any. I think it's like the Pacific. I don't know that there were any tank-on-tank battles, but there were battles in which, PT-76s.
How well does it handle the inherently asymmetric nature of some bits of Vietnam warfare?
So I don't know. I don't know because I haven't tried it, but I suspect that.
Good answer.
Yeah, so I suspect that some of the issues about some of the nuances to the activation scheme, I think, would help. I think you have to then use the optional rules for spotting. And my guess is there's a lot of optional rules that I would need to write for things like booby traps and food gas and claymore mines, and none of that stuff is. You could imagine as a player,
I could steal those for British Home Front with the Home Guard as well.
So that's another one where I'd really like to go with it. Right, would be kind of a Sea Lion Home Guard supplement.
I'm there for that.
I'd really like to do that. As a kid, so I said I grew up in near Detroit, and we got a lot of Canadian TV. So, I'm a big fan of things like Are You Being Served and Keeping Up Appearances and
I assume you're heading here towards Dad's Army.
Dad's Army.
That's right. So that's where I was heading, and I love Dad's Army and Allo and some of those shows. So now. The recent Dad's Army movie didn't make it to the U.S. that I know of, so I'm kind of disappointed. I wanted to see it, although usually remakes make a hash of the original, but I wanted to see it. But so yeah, I'd really like to do a Home Guard, and in that sense, it would probably be both, to try to have kind of a cinematic feel to it, where you do some of the characters maybe from what are the stats for the various characters in Dad's Army, but also, Dad's Army tends to trivialize what was really a kind of I'm sure, a very desperate feeling time in the UK, right? And so if you did a Sea Lion set of scenarios, I think that would be really fun. As a gamer, right? Probably wouldn't be very fun if it really occurred. But and it also brings me back to a movie I mentioned earlier, Went the Day Well, about the town of Bramley and German fifth columnists, and I could really see having fun using Combat Patrol to play some of those.
There's also a rather good What If novel by Andy Johnson, who I believe is also ex-military, called Zalo and Nord, which is a different premise for Operation Sea Lion, which looks like it will lend itself very nicely to devising scenarios.
Well, and also, if you're in the what if range, right, you could imagine some German forces coming into Ireland, right? And anyway, I think there's lots of opportunities. And basically, to answer your earlier question, I'm happy to go in whatever direction the community wants to go, and then I'll go in some directions myself because I want to go in those directions. But I want to try to give the community what they want. So.
There you go, Mike. If you could write that up in the next couple of days.
Oh yeah, I'll do that in my copious free time when I'm not doing all the other things that I'm supposed to be doing.
You raised it. Off you go.
I have a Dux Britanniarum supplement to finish first.
Very good.
Excellent stuff. Well, Buck, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about Combat Patrol.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I enjoyed it. So, and I hope to get to another UK show and
come to Hereward next year.
Well, it lined up really nicely with a work trip to London to get to Partisan in June. I don't know when I'll next have that opportunity, but I really enjoyed gaming in the UK with folks at Partisan. I'd love to do it again. So.
Well, as I say, Buck, thank you for coming on the show. Wish you continued success with the rules. I'm glad you're getting positive feedback about them. say we shall look forward to getting you back on to chat about some of the other stuff. As I say, it sounds like at least there might be an appetite to go in depth with something like Luxarge and that whole family. Because as I say, it sounds like you've a massive family of rules there that we could do with delving into at some point.
Sounds great. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And now it's time to hear from you, as we open up the Meeples and Miniatures mailbag. Welcome back to the mailbag. We're catching up on a few more questions that you sent us over the last few weeks. We'll start with one that I've already been told off about because I nicked it and wrote an editorial column on the blog a couple of weeks ago.
Usurped is the word.
Yeah. I actually thought this was actually quite a good idea. It means we can get through some of the mailbag questions, but with you answering them. So off you go.
I move that we just don't allow Neil to answer this one this time.
Yes.
Okay, right. If you want to know my answer to the question, then look for the editorial column that says, how do you go? Okay, and that's my answer. If you want everybody else's answer to the question, now is your chance. So, what question did I usurp? I hear you ask. Okay, here's the question.
What question did you usurp, Neil?
Aha, I'm glad you asked me that one. Okay, so the question
Tell
is...
me to.
I find that activation seems to weigh heavily in my decision to try a new rule set. Games that use an I Go You Go system, especially those with a high model count, really put me off. Have you ever not tried a rule set simply because of the activation system? Or am I just being difficult? And with the large number of rule sets that the Meeples have tried, is there an activation system that you feel is the best?
Who's going to do this one? Oh, tell you what, I've got a pack of cards here. Right, that's Luffy, that's Hobbsy, that's me.
Is this an activation system?
Draw. Yeah. Hobbsy.
Is it my go? Okay. Right. I'll be honest, it doesn't put me off. If a game system uses I Go, You Go, it doesn't put me off, but I probably wouldn't play it for long. I definitely read it, or start to read it. But there's so many other different mechanics. I mean, because you can have an I Go You Go system which has really, really good combat and morale mechanics in there, and that'll overweigh. It's when you've got a rubbish turn sequence with a rubbish combat system and a rubbish morale system that I get turned off. So I would probably try it, but I think there are better ones out there. The activation system I think is the best. I don't think there is one that's the best, because if there was, we'd all use it. You've got to look at it in context with the rules. And with
cop out. Pin your colours to the mast. Go on.
No, I don't think you can. I will turn around and say that Sword and Spear has got a great activation system, but that activation system probably wouldn't work in a tiny little pulp game with 10 characters. Whereas a single figure activation works in that. So it's horses for courses. It's finding the right rule for the right thing that you're trying to model.
Yeah, I agree with you then.
Oh, that's good. It's your card up next, Luffy.
It's mine. Ooh. For me, I think Neil could answer this question for me virtually.
He's already answered it. Go look at his blog.
Definitely. Definitely. I hate I Go, You Go. Neil well knows that. Any system that allows me to not quite know what's going to happen next in a command system wins hands down for me. If I see that it's I Go, You Go, really, that is quite often the end of my interest in the rule set. As for what Hobbs is saying,
and yet you like Command and Colours, which is technically I Go, You Go.
It is, but it isn't.
But,
Is it?
well, why isn't it?
Well,
It
because
isn't because you can't move everything. Normal, I go, you go.
That's
you do
right.
everything.
The cards do limit you. Some, as Neil found out last week.
More on that later.
More on that later.
Or earlier, depending on what order this gets put in the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the cards do sort of change that I go, you go system in respect as, you do play a card each, but you never quite know what the opposition are going to do. I think as what Mike alluded to, the sort of the pure I go, you go system where you can move everything is the massive off-put for me. As it goes for what is the best system, and I think very much as what Mike's already said, as long as it's sort of a different activation system, something that's a little bit more imaginative, then I've not really got a favourite, to be fair. But I think it all depends on the system and what you're trying to achieve, which actually works best. But the I go, you go would definitely turn me off. So Bob Martin, for me, you're definitely not being difficult.
Have to agree. My card next. I have gone majorly off what you might call perfect I go, you go systems, where you're going to get to move all your stuff before the opposite opponent gets to move anything. The only one of those I used to play with any regularity was WAB, and I've gone off WAB anyway, and that was certainly one of the contributing factors. I'm on this flipping podcast largely because of a certain Mr. Richard Clark espousing activation systems with friction, and me suddenly realising, yes, that's how the world's supposed to work. So I'm with these guys really. Anything that gives me a sense that I'm trying to control and command a bunch of slightly unpredictable human beings, I think will be a fair summary. That said, one of my major go-to games at the moment is still Sails of Glory, which, bizarrely, everybody gets to move, but it's completely simultaneous, which is different. I actually quite like the fact that it's simultaneous, because it does mean there is the potential, especially if you've got people on the same side commanding their own ships, there is much possibility for disaster, and frequently happens in our games. But favourite activation systems, it's probably quite telling that whenever we write a one-page rule set for a show game for the club, we almost invariably end up with a bag of tokens with unit names on it. I know it's very simple, but it does provide random activation, and you can always stick a T-break or whatever you want to call it token in there to stop it before everything's gone. And I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for A&B and Shotgun's activation system, which is fundamentally that. And also, I guess if you go to the other two things I really like, Chain of Command, and as discussed in a previous review, Altar of Freedom. And next card of the deck. Sorry, Neil. It's the T-break card. You don't get to go.
But you could ask the next question.
So, for that question, Bob now gets a Brucey bonus, which is this. He was recently playing a game of Paul Pally. Good man.
Good game.
And he was playing an opponent that went into hiding. When in this mode, the character cannot be attacked by an opponent, but they aren't really truly hidden either. Their opponent can still see the model of the table and know where they will eventually be revealed. Are you aware of any miniatures gaming system that truly allows for hiding/stealth to the point of not having to have a model on the table, but would still allow for accurate movement on the table until the point of reveal? A recent board game that springs to mind that does this is Spectre Ops, but that requires the hidden player to mark all of their moves on a diagram that duplicates the playing board. This is easily done with a board game where the layout is static, but has anyone done this sort of thing successfully with a minis game where terrain is placed differently in each game?
Yes.
Ain't been Shotman?
I was going to say.
That's partly it, isn't it?
One of the things that can happen in Ain't Been Shotman is that if a unit does something off a blind and fails to be spotted, you can, I believe, under some circumstances, put it back on a blind and potentially have multiple blinds depart from its last seen spot.
Mm. Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and the only game that I could think of that does it, where, I mean, lots of games you can start off hidden, but once you come out of being hidden, you can't go back into it.
Right.
The only one I can think of that does it is Kriegspiel. But to do that, you need 3 boards, an umpire, well, actually 3 rooms with 3 identical tables, an umpire.
I was about to say, at Eastern Front, last time Eastern Front actually happened in Norwich, I think it was the very British Civil War Forum guys had a game where they essentially had the same table twice and a screen.
Mm. So, yeah, it's doable, but it ain't something you do as a throwaway game at the club. It's something you really have to plan.
Mm.
I'll have an umpire.
What about, I mean, this isn't a whole game, I'd say, but where something can come onto the table and then disappear again is the ambush rules in Chain of Command.
Good point, well made.
Yeah.
Because your AT team can appear and disappear again and reappear again, as Neil's found out.
Mm.
Yeah.
To his cost.
Has he been suffering?
Yeah, just a bit, on the odd occasion.
Yeah.
Pits.
So there's a few games that sort of do bits of it, but there's nothing that sort of...
That's right, they just touch on it, don't
they?
Like you say, because I think even if you're doing blinds, even if you've got multiple blinds for a figure, and there are several systems that do that, whether that's individual figures or whether that's units, you still know that there's something somewhere, and one of those blinds is going to turn out to be the enemy. Even if you've got multiple dummies, one of them is going to be the enemy.
That's right.
So unless you're using a map,
at which point you either need an umpire or to really trust each other.
Yeah.
Unless you're using a map, then and again, it's something that I think as to a great extent,
written orders.
Yeah, it's kind of fallen out of favour a lot in recent years. As I say, you go back to back in the 70s, back in the day.
I mean, the rules we were using, the skirmish rules we were using for the 100 Years War game, actually have written orders in the original rule set. And to go back to our previous question, we replaced it with token-based small unit activation because it's not really something sensible you can do at a show, but it's certainly an option.
Yeah, but I mean, looking at sort of a Paul Bally style game, which is a small gang game, I can't think of anything that allows you to, take a figure off a table and then put it back on the table again later on.
No, I mean, even when you think about small unit systems, like sci-fi things where you end up with or even fantasy when you end up with cloaking shields or invisibility cloaks or that sort of thing, they always seem to be a case of people have spotting rolls or what have you, but the model is still on the table. Yeah, it never kind of just disappears. I don't know of any. I really don't.
Good question.
Yeah, very good.
And
the next
question from Kevin A. Kaiser. Hi guys, he says, and the question or the email is entitled this: a question of scale, 6mm or 15mm. How do you decide? Just wondering if this has ever come up before on the show. I'm slowly returning to painting and playing with a mountain of lead that I've gathered over a number of years. I think we've all been there. Sorry.
For yourself.
Yeah. Who are you again?
Don't know.
Call yourself a gamer? I don't know. I only play Blood Bowl religiously, but I've always wanted to slowly venture into amassing massive Carthaginian and Roman armies for a giant Punic campaign. I know 25 to 32mm is right out for what I want. Plastics? No? But how do I decide between the other smaller scales? I like 6mm because I used to do Battletech, but I feel like I really don't know enough to start collecting at either scale at this point. Is there a clear advantage in terms of popularity and availability of either scales, figures, and rules? How would you decide if you were just starting out with Ancients and had to pick up just one scale?
There's several questions in that, isn't there, really?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it brings up the question of what do you pick first, the rule set or the figures? Which has come up before, hasn't it, in the mailbag?
There aren't, to be fair, that many ancient rule sets at the smaller end scale that won't cope with both.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is most of the rules out there they have a base. What you put on the base doesn't really matter.
It's just a token.
Yeah,
A man once said.
a wise man once said, "It's just a token."
Was that a Welsh attempt at a Leicester accent?
I think it was. I haven't got a Leicester accent anyway.
Which is worrying, because he's certainly more Yorkshire.
I was going for Jeffrey Boycott.
Jeffrey Boycott.
Hey, my grandmother could have taken out those Romans with a stick of rhubarb.
Aye. If it was me, I'd find a set of rules that I liked, look at the basing system, and then look at figures. I think if you're collecting both armies, but go and buy a sample, go and buy a couple of packs of 15s, a couple of packs of 6s from Bacchus, Westwind, another million different manufacturers. Find the figures that you really like, paint up a few, work out whether you can really be bothered to paint up another 4,500 of these things, and if you can, go off and do it.
From what he's saying in his question, where it says wanted to slowly venture into amassing a massive Carthaginian and Roman army,
it's sort of saying 6 mil, isn't it?
It's saying 6 mil, and what I'd say about 6 mil, the beauty of doing 6 mil, is that you can turn them into little dioramas, which I think, Neil knows that I like the 60 by 60 dioramas of 6 mil, which just look fantastic, especially for mass battle games. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Good idea, that.
Yeah, and again, part of it is actually there were two things involved here as well. Two other things to consider. One is actually you paint a 6 mil figure and a 15 mil figure very differently.
Mm-hmm.
A 15 mil figure is to a greater or lesser extent a mini 28 mil figure. You still got the same base coat highlight.
A lot of detail there still, isn't there?
There is an awful lot of detail, and you can potentially spend an awful lot of time on a 15 mil, as much time painting a 15 mil figure as you can a 28. When you get down to 6,
paint the unit.
What the man said, it's a completely different style. Having said that, at the same time, you could be in a situation where a unit in 15 mil. A base in 15 mil can consist of 4 figures. That same base in 10 mil will consist of 16 figures, 20 figures even, depending on what you're doing. And again, and of course the other thing is that there's 10 mil as well, which is kind of like in the middle.
Which is one of the things I was going to point out, is if you're looking for that compromise between the massive sweep that you can get out of 6 mil and that little bit extra bit of detail you can get out of 15, then 10.
Yeah, just to throw another fly in the ointment. But yeah, I mean, certainly from if you want an army to really, 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 really look like an army, then 6 mil is a way to go, because nothing does mass battle better than 6 mil.
Of course, the other thing to look at is the fact of price, time to paint the stuff, and also storage. It's something probably not a lot of us war gamers think about until the army's been stuck together, painted, got all the nice scenery done, and then we go, where are we going to store all this? And 6 mil stores very nicely.
I've solved that problem. You just take it around a mate's house.
Yeah.
Well, 15 does as well. If you, it's the basing, isn't it, Dave? I mean, what you say is right. I like small figures on big bases.
Yeah, that's a big thing
really
for
good.
me.
Yeah,
it does look awesome. I mean, look at Steve Jones's Napoleonic stuff. If anyone wants to look, it's on Paint Shed, isn't it? His site is. You look at his stuff. He's done on 60x60 maces. It just turns into a mini modeler's diorama. It's just they're very good, and loads of people now have sort of followed on those footsteps, haven't they? Now,
I was going to say, if you actually want an answer to the question that is asked, which is if you were starting out again with Ancients and had to pick just one scale, I may be about to surprise everybody, but for Mass Battle Ancients, if I was starting out fresh, I'd go 6.
I have actually just started Ancients Mass Battle, and I've gone 15s. But on big 80x40 and 80x60 bases.
Yeah, but no, I'd go 6 just for the sheer look of it.
Yeah,
there's still work to do here, Neil.
There is still work to do. I mean, our answer is go 6. It's always a bit of a compromise between how you want your game to look.
Well, I mean, you take a 6mm phalanx, and on a 60x60 base, and it looks like a phalanx. It doesn't look like a couple of blokes taking a spears for a walk.
Yeah. Of course, the other thing
we do love that phrase, don't we?
Yeah. Of course, the other thing you could do is go and buy a copy of Command in Colours Ancients, which has Romans versus Carthaginians, play one of the battles with all the blocks, and then think, right, each of those blocks is going to be one unit on the battlefield.
But it's just a token, isn't it?
It's a token, yeah.
Just a token.
Just a token.
Just remember, though, you only put the stickers on one side.
Don't listen to him. He's talking heresy. It's both sides or nothing.
Board Game Geek, it was on Board Game Geek. Someone said it was a good idea to put them only on one side so that they don't topple over and they're easily slidable across the board.
Weaklings.
And alternatively, you could also play Stratego with them.
Yeah, play Stratego. Yeah, that would be awesome. Actually,
actually, does that answer the previous question? That talking about hidden movement. If you only had the stickers on one side, you just see this force moving towards you in Command and Colours with wooden blocks, and then you wouldn't know what it was until you actually came close to it, and it turned over, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, heck, I really don't want to be charging your heavy infantry with my unit of auxilia.
I feel a test game coming on, Neil.
You better make sure you don't put the stickers on the other side before you do it.
Well, having said that, after Neil's last game, it might help.
Doesn't really matter.
Gordon, that's another question that's been.
Well, just one more. Okay. Is there a clear advantage of popularity of figures and rule sets? Now, actually, that's a separate question, isn't it? Because the other thing is that because the other issue actually boils down to actually turning around and saying, what's everybody else doing? However, you do say that you are getting both sides. So if you're buying both sides, you can decide what you're doing and then actually bring your armies along. If you're only doing one side, then you really are. It really is a case of, well, what are other people playing?
But that said, a lot of the newer Ancients rule sets that we have raved about recently are very much element based, and in a lot of cases, including at least 2 or 3 I can think of, measuring base widths.
Yeah, but I think you might have a problem if you end up in a situation where you've got two players playing. They both have the same base width. They both have the same size bases, except one has 28mm figures on and the other one has 6.
Yeah, but my point. I was assuming that he was making both sides.
Yeah. War game in Lilliput.
My point was more that at this point, most of the rule sizes that really are for ancient mass battles are pretty figure scale agnostic.
Yeah.
This is small, this is far away.
and he does say he's going to
mass battles. We're not discussing skirmish here.
Yes, very true.
Yes.
They say it's very clear. It says mass battle.
Yeah, I know. I know. It was just
amassing a massive Carthaginian and Roman army.
You just to get the word massive twice in 3 syllables.
Yeah. Right, so the clear advantage in terms of popularity and availability of either scales, figures, and rule sets.
If it wasn't for what Westwind have just done, I'd say 6.
I think, historically, oh boy, if you'll pardon the pun, 15, yeah, a lot of people play Ancients in 15s.
If you want a one-stop shop, then you've got to look at something like Bacchus, haven't you?
Yeah, or whoever the folks who do 10s are. Pendragon?
Pendragon, yeah.
Pendragon, yeah.
For those two armies, yeah, Bacchus would be the awesome one-stop
You
shop.
just walk up to Bacchus at a show, hold out your wallet, and say, "Here, help yourself."
Yeah, very nice figures as well there in both of those armies.
Especially now they've been resculpted. The resculpted ones are so nice.
Or even nicer up.
Yeah. But I get some samples. Get a couple of packs of each from different scales, different manufacturers. Try them out. Paint them.
Go find a local show where they're at and have a look.
Yeah.
But don't look at the individual figure if you're doing 6mm. It's the unit. You've got to get them based. Then they come alive.
Have we covered that?
Yeah.
Good job, guys.
Okay, next question. Hi, friend. Hello, John. Right. I don't know anything about the competition scene in the UK. Perhaps you could describe what it is. Things like which games are played and with what figures, where, how do people get involved, how big is the competition circuit, and so on. And he's asking us.
Suppose I better answer that then, hadn't I? Given my show had several.
Go on then.
You're about the nearest person we've got, Mike, to a competition gamer.
I used to do competition web. As far as I understand it, and given you have to bear in mind here that I'm not greatly involved in any of the Games Workshop competition there is seen, there is still a reasonably thriving GW competition scene, including 40k, Age of Sigmar, and the various Old Hammer, etc. variants. Mantic are fairly keen on promoting Kings of War and Dreadball, and one would assume that once Warpath gets itself going, Warpath, etc., 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 Griffin Beast are promoting 2 different styles of Saga Tournament now. They've got all the melees, and they've got the Iron Man.
And Bolt Action?
Yeah.
Games of War,
Steve, Bolt Action. Bolt Action is stunningly huge. Steve Tibbs from 2D6 in Cambridge has just opened up sales for a Cambridge Too Far in March next year, and their 70 places sold out in an hour and 22 minutes. And I know for a fact that he's got a waiting list long enough for all the spaces he thinks he can probably open up. And that's, I wouldn't say that's typical. I mean, some of the tournaments for some of the games, you're lucky if you see 20. I would expect that some of the things that happen out at Games Workshop Towers are probably 5 times that number or more.
There's also big competition scenes for the
War Machine.
War Machine, yeah. X-Wings.
Yeah. I hadn't even got that far.
Yeah.
Guild Ball,
yeah. Most of them you'll find, some, but not many, are attached to War Games shows. You'll find most of them are, I think, run as little independent functions in somebody's club hall or a village hall or
Derby's.
Or
Derby's
a gaming centre. Derby's probably one of the counter examples, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Derby has a lot of tournaments.
And also don't forget the British Historical Games Society.
How could we?
Run a whole series of events throughout the year. You know, singles tournaments, doubles tournaments.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, in ancient rules of your choice. I think over recent years that's primarily been DBM. Although I think it's DBM, DBA, FOG. Funny enough, more recently, new set of rules, Mortem et Gloriam. One of the things that's aimed at is tournaments.
Yeah, there is a degree to which it depends on well, you could look at the intent of the rules manufacturer, because sometimes it's very clear that they were intended as a tournament set. Bolt Action springs to mind. Most of the Mantic rule sets, War Machine, etc., etc. Some obviously aren't. You'll find that I think a lot of the Warhammer Ancients and War and Conquest community tend to play, quotes, campaign days rather than tournaments, in that they'll have a series of themed battles for which, and there will be a winner, but it won't be a win at all costs, bring your killer army kind of tournament. It'll be something much more laid back. But that's really the best I can do, because I've stopped. The only thing I used to play was Tournament Web, and I stopped that a while ago.
So, touching on the end of John's question here, he says, how big is the competition circuit in the UK? I mean, how big do you think it is, guys? I mean, for me and Neil, we've never really been interested particularly in the competition side. We're quite happy to go for friendly gaming days with complete strangers, but when it gets to the competition side, especially from our old club, Hey Neil, and some of the stories the guys coming back from playing DBM at the weekend, and it was like, well, I nearly killed the bloke, but not quite, Well,
I think it's quite big still. I mean, if you look at, just looking at Firestorm, and probably Neil, you probably say it's about, is it Battlefields?
Yeah, Battlefield, yeah.
Yeah. They're probably running competitions weekly. I mean, I know Firestorm has regularly 1 or 2 competitions every weekend.
What sort of competitions are they, Mike, though? Are they the hardcore stuff? Or are they more sort of...
Oh, some of them are really hardcore. I mean,
yeah.
Like Mike said, it depends on the manufacturer. Some manufacturers really support the competition side of things. And, you've got the Fantasy Flight ones where the winner can get like a ticket and a flight to Gen Con, just for playing Star Wars Armada.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, it is. It can be big. It can be small. It can be half a dozen blokes get together to play a game.
Popping onto the Warhammer forum, just on their columns thread, on their tournaments thread, a lot of the tournaments seem to be around the 20-player size.
Because we haven't even mentioned card games.
Yeah,
card game competitions are massive. I mean, I know Firestorm will have 200 people. Sort of like once a month or so, will turn up and play card games.
Yeah, the one thing with the one thing I saw at this Tumbleweed Con from a couple of weeks ago was the fact that they had a Vanguard tournament. They must have had somewhere between 200 and 250 people. Yeah. Okay. This is where I make my shock confession, and will get locked out of the Meeples bunker.
What? You're a DBM player? Tournament? This is what you're going to tell us?
I'm currently considering
playing
a
that
tournament.
Little caveat you put in there, guys. He's just like, I'm not sure yet, but
drum roll.
Okay. So I was looking at potentially Saga. Guild Ball. Okay. I can tell you right from the start, I had a quick look around for local Guild Ball tournaments. Okay. There's a shop, was it Black Dragon Games in Hinckley, I think, run a quite regular Guild Ball tournament. That is sold out until the new year. All the other Guild Ball tournaments I saw around the country between now and Christmas are essentially already sold out. I thought, Grand Malay at Derby. No, not a hope of getting in that one. For Saga, doesn't seem to be a tremendous amount of Saga stuff around. But yeah, I was kind of looking at. I don't know how competitive the Guild Ball circuit is, or the X-Wing circuit for that matter. How difficult is it to break into it? As I say, I was looking around thinking, okay, I might like a game of this, I might like a game of that, I might like a game of this, and just dip my toe in the water and actually kind of see, what's it all about? Is it as bad as we really think it is, or are we...
Define bad.
We maybe have been influenced by other people's anecdotal experience.
Very good, yeah.
Conversely, I've heard some very good things, very positive experiences of people who play who play in tournaments.
If you remember Gareth, who came to talk to us at last year's Hereward, he had nothing but nice things to say about the Dreadball tournament scene.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think most tournaments that I've seen being played tend to separate out into two. You get the really hardcore tournament players who want to win, and if it's a big prize, they really want to win. But then underneath that, you've got almost like the second division of people who just want to play and want to learn. And a lot of the times, the people who run the tournaments will turn around to someone and say, right, this guy's new, show him the ropes, And if it's one of the hardcore guys, it's a case of, right, you're going to get an easy win. Don't crush him. Just show him, talk to him, show him the ropes. And that they're trying to make it a lot more inclusive. I think the bad old days of having, very, very competitive.
I've heard some real horror stories about some of the older days fantasy tournaments at Games Workshop.
Yeah, and I think
I'm sure you have too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's been jumped out. But again, with the tournaments, some of the tournaments are really, really hardcore ones, and it's like you don't go and jump into an F1 car and take part in a Grand Prix if you only just learn to drive. So start small, start with a small tournament, start speaking to people. If you turn up there and you don't know the rules, just turn around to the person and say, look, can you just help me out? First time in the tournament, really appreciate it. Most tournaments do now have most gentlemanly conduct sort of prizes as well.
I think, is this a thing that's evolved over recent years, you feel, Mike? Because it seems to be that some of these sort of like, let's say, friendly gaming days that were going on about 5 or 6 years ago have sort of evolved now into more sort of like a friendly tournament, quotations. What do you think? Do you think that's where this has evolved from? Because it always seemed to me that there wasn't a lot of choice out there. Most tournament gaming, say 10 years ago, was pretty hardcore.
Yeah, I think it's changed. I mean, I haven't played a tournament for a long time, and that's because, well, I just wanted to kill the people I was playing against. But watching in at the ones in Firestorm, there's people having a laugh, people having a joke, and people helping each other.
That's almost something that I could get involved in.
It really, really does depend, I think, very much on the prevailing sort of group of people who do it. For all I've said many times, I won't play Tournament Web anymore. It's absolutely nothing to do with the really, really very nice group of people who used to play Tournament Web back when I played Tournament Web. I think we've even actually had a couple of them on the show in other capacities. But, in general, they're all really, really nice folks. Nobody was, with I think possible one isolated exception that nobody liked anyway, was in the business of wiping the floor with you and making a mockery of your web abilities, which is pretty good for me because I obviously invariably ended up with a wooden spoon. And it was a really nice group of folks. And I think that covers, I suspect these days, a majority of the tournament scene. There are probably a few tournament scenes out there which are still, how can I put this? Using the game rules as a framework for a contest of pure skill and nothing else.
You mean playing the rules and not the period? As a wise man once said.
As a wise man once said. Yes, pretty much. Some tournaments are still, as far as I can see, some games, tournament ethos is still build the best thing you can within the rules and clean everybody else's clock with it. But most of the tournaments that I've watched or seen our club run or put my head in on or been a part of don't fall into that category anymore.
Funnily enough, I was talking to James Hamilton, he of aforementioned Battlefield Hobbies, when we did this Ultimate Glorium Day, that boot camp I mentioned in the last show. And he was actually DBM World Champion one year.
Ooh.
There you go. But he was heavily into the BHDS tournament scene. And it was interesting having a conversation with him because he turned around, he was talking about, you could tell there were certain tiers of players. And certainly with a game like DBM, you could outrule your opponent. You won simply because you knew the rules an awful lot better than your opponent. And that's how people won the game.
Rules lawyer.
And funnily enough, now we will find this out hopefully when we talk to Simon Hall. But I believe one of the reasons behind Mortem et Gloriam is to try and get away from that a little bit more, to be more of being a general of an army as opposed to somebody who knows the rules back to front. Which again is, I suppose, and that was a remark from somebody who has been there and done that for several years. I am toying with the idea of having a go,
turning to the dark side.
So having a go and say, okay, right, whether it's Saga or whether it's Saga or something like Guild Ball, and just or even X-Wing.
I have to say, having come second in our first club Dreadball League, I gave serious thought to doing a bit of tournament Dreadball.
Well, that's the other thing, except for the fact that obviously there's a bit of confusion around Dreadball at the moment, isn't there?
That's one of, and the two things that stop me are I'm not entirely convinced with the game balance after seasons 4, 5, and 6. And I'm certainly not convinced with the game balance by the time they finish faffing around with it for Dreadball 2.
Yeah. So, interesting question, John, and it might be something we'll probably end up revisiting because, as I say, there might be one or two of us who could be considering dipping their toe in the water. So, of course, the other thing is look out for Miniature War Games the movie, because one of the things they do in that is follow two guys who are playing tournament bolt action.
Heck yeah.
So, including, I believe they end up in Norway or something like that, playing tournament bolt action. So it will be interesting to see in that part of the film, window into a world we know little about. And obviously, again, something has to invite. If you're involved in the tournament scene and you think we're talking a completely load of cobblers, right in,
enlighten us.
Indeed,
enlighten us.
Seriously, I mean, in all honesty,
because it is something that we have a very limited knowledge about, isn't it? Really, between all four of us.
Record us a piece of audio with your opinions, and we'll edit you in.
Indeed, definitely. Or ring us
on.
Yes, or ring us on our new mailbag line. More of which later. Okay, moving on.
The bringer of cake.
Where's my cake? Phantom Cake Bandit.
Isn't he Mervyn the bringer of beer now?
Well, yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
See any, Neil?
Yeah, don't worry about that. Moving on.
Yeah, I was about to say, and you got beer and I got cake, and you're complaining why exactly?
Because you got cake.
Beer-flavoured cake. That's the next one.
So, to the next question.
What is your favourite cake? Oh, sorry. What is your favourite war-stroke military film? Is there any particular part of a film that inspires you to want to get your toys out, Mrs.? Are there any scenes that you have used or want to recreate on the tabletop?
Neil and I have touched on this before, haven't we, Neil?
We have.
You've been touching your toys.
It's got to be Kelly's Heroes for me. Or is it Kenneth's Heroes?
Oh, well, yeah, as I say, we're Kelly's Heroes, but we are because Dave has basically painted Brits rather than Americans. We are certainly. It might even appear at Market Larden next year. You never know, but we have been discussing between us Kenneth's Heroes. and doing basically a British version of Kelly's. I mean, of course, I haven't put this out there now. People are going to nick the idea.
Yeah. Maybe we should keep it quiet.
But we certainly thought about doing a. We
best not talk about any of the other funny names that we thought of.
No. But certainly, we thought about doing the idea of maybe a point-size campaign based on all the different action sequences from Kelly's Heroes.
Go on, Mike, your turn.
Favourite war film is unquestionably A Bridge Too Far. For all that we can't really forgive them for some of the dreadful abuses of historical prototypes for tanks.
It's a panther. No, it's not. It's a leopard.
It's a leopard. Yes. There is something about that creeping barrage that opens up the film that is just awesome. Not that it's something you'd ever necessarily be able to create on any sensible sized table. If you count of film length, I'd have to say Shah.
Good one.
Yeah.
Given that most of the episodes are an hour and a half, which is movie length.
Yeah.
And half of them are crying out to be recreated using the obvious set of rules, and I will be.
But don't do the same amount of figures because you'll have a very boring game.
Well, quite, yes.
I'm surprised no one's made a full film of one of those books yet, to be honest.
Oh. If you think about it, the TV show episodes are an hour and a half long. That's a movie for all practical purposes. They are TV films, effectively.
I suppose it's Hollywood, though, and it's the commercial viability of it, isn't it? And how many people are going to watch it? And as we see what Hollywood are churning out, they're churning out films for the masses, or
and
what
besides,
they perceive of the masses.
You can't have Sean Bean die in it.
Well, no.
Ooh,
Go on, Obsy.
I do have a very soft spot for Kelly's Heroes. And I know it's a complete pastiche, and
can I confess I've never actually seen it?
Oh, mate.
Oh, what?
Oh no!
Yeah. I mean, it is literally Vietnam.
You never watched. He's going to say he's never watched Star Wars now.
Yeah. But favourite, I do like Waterloo.
Yeah. Well,
wow.
Yeah. For an epic. Yeah.
That's a goodie, and Stalingrad as well. I think was an immensely good film.
Yeah.
And Ice Cold in Alex, and I could go on for the next half hour if you wanted to.
Ice Cold in Alex. Do you know he hated lager?
Yeah.
Hated the taste of it, and apparently they couldn't get the take right, apparently, and everyone thought they'd just replaced it, and it wasn't. It was the real deal, and he kept on having to down these pints of lager that he hated. He just didn't like lager, and he was half cut by the time they got it in the can. He reckoned.
Yeah.
First ever product placement, wasn't it, within the film? I think.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely movie.
Yeah.
Also, just for fun, and well, you might want to come to the Royal Armoury in November. African Queen.
Oh God, yeah. Oh God, this segment's going to go on for the next 40 minutes, isn't it? Whilst us,
I'm suggesting that because I happen to know what we've got planned for the Royal Army's World War I Day.
Oh right, okay.
Out of interest, how does The Longest Day sit with you guys?
Oh, it's a good film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the thing about The Longest Day is fundamentally it's shall we do a bit of D-Day then?
Yeah.
There isn't. It's not really one of those movies where you say, I want to reenact that scene.
Well, that star-studded cast of every star that was ever in the war film, just about,
including some who were there for real.
Yep.
Well, quite yes.
David Niven. Wasn't that his famous quote actually on D-Day when he turned around and went, "It's all right for you chaps, you only have to do it once. I'll have to do it again with Ellen
Yeah. Yes. Here's a couple of interesting ones. Oh yeah, agree. Bridge Too Far, one of my all-time favourites. A big soft spot for Kelly's Heroes. My all-time favourite military film, Aliens.
Yeah, I'll give you that one.
Excuse me while I dig out a box of Space Hulk.
Hang on. What's that? What's Alien? What is that?
They had guns.
Oh, hang on.
Dave, are you seriously winding me up?
No, I realise. I remember. That's it. That's that sci-fi thing Neil's into.
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now. Now there's a film.
Oh yeah.
No.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yeah.
It's one. Yeah, it's one scene. I mean, one scene in one scene.
No,
in
no.
Apocalypse Now.
The best scene is with the tiger. No, never get out of the boat, man. Never get
No,
out of
the boat. Yeah, yeah.
Charlie don't surf.
We were soldiers. I like. I know it has its flaws.
Yeah, it's a good film.
But I do like We Were Soldiers, and whatever you think of the home front side of things, which is a bit, I mean, the home front side is just, not great, but certainly all the stuff filmed, the action sequences and stuff, are not only well filmed, but, aren't a million miles away from what actually happened. So I quite like that.
I've missed one, and permission to have a really large facepalm moment.
Go on.
I think we all missed one.
Dambusters.
Oh, I was going to say that one. Good film, though.
Dambusters.
Yeah, brilliant film.
We've done it.
You have done it
2 years ago.
Yes, you've done it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it answers the question. Yes. Are there any scenes you have used? Of course you did. Yes.
Just a bit.
I have once done the Kelly's Heroes bank raid in a game.
Have you?
Yeah, I did. It was a Battlefront World War II multiplayer game. We used to put them on sort of once a year.
What did you do? Did you cut a deal?
No, I was sort of umpiring it. So we had 8 players. They each had a box with their forces and their orders. And one of the guys was told to go and break into the village in the bank and get some documents from the bank, whilst the other player was told that somebody was trying to break into the bank and steal some gold. So basically, we had 2 bunches of Yanks fighting out amongst themselves in the middle of the table, whilst everybody else was looking on going, "What are you doing?" There's Germans going up the road, and they're fighting. So I basically just dropped all that in there.
Nice.
It was great fun. I was handing out sort of envelopes with new orders and new intel. Great fun.
You couldn't cut a deal.
No.
Brilliant stuff.
So we have glossed over the second part of Mira's question. Is there any particular part of a film that inspires you to want to get your toys out? Anybody want to say the obvious one?
What, Zulu.
I was going to say Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes.
There is that, yeah.
Yes, to Saving Private Ryan. It was the.
And you've done it, Mike.
Well, it was the reference material for actually setting up bloody Omaha at Operation Market Garden first.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, for us, we've already answered that, haven't we, Neil, really?
Well, yeah.
It'll be Kelly's Heroes, then.
Kelly's Heroes, but yeah, certainly also, yes, Men of Harlock at Zulu. I know, not only do they sing made-up words, but they sing the wrong tune.
If it's Zulu, you've got to do it in 6mm to get thousands of them as well.
Literally thousands of them. Either that, you need a very large table and a very friendly warlord dealer.
Yes, but yeah, that's why Mr. Hobbs won't choose Zulu because it's just so wrong. Isn't that right, Hobbsy?
It's a tricky one being a Welshman because thing is, I love it, and we used to watch it every Boxing Day. We'd all go to the pub, and after 3 or 4 hours, my mum would come and get us from the pub. Me and my brother-in-laws and my nephews. We would pop to the pub for half an hour. 3 hours later, we come steaming back. Yeah, we come steaming back and watch Zulu.
It might not be historically correct, but maybe it catches the Welsh spirit.
Yes.
Yeah, not every movie. Well, an awful lot of war movies take untold liberties with history, but that does not fail to make them good stories.
Yeah,
and inspiring.
There's been a few massive ones that have took liberties in the last few years, last decade.
Fury.
I haven't seen that yet.
Neither have I, but I've read reviews. It's on my film rental list for when I next return a movie.
I was thinking more along the lines of that certain U521, was it?
U571, where the Americans discovered the Enigma machine. Yes.
Well, John Bon Jovi.
I was like, oh my word. Yeah. Never mind.
Moving on.
I think that's about it, isn't it? Really?
I think that's.
Before someone else comes up with a movie.
Yeah, I think we have kind of answered that one to death, don't you think, guys?
Mm.
And actually, looking at the time, I think at that point we could do closing the mailbox for this for this time round, don't you think?
I think you've got your money's worth, folks.
Certainly. So, thank you very much, everybody who has mailed in. Thank you very much for your questions, and we will endeavour to answer some more in the near future.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I'm off to unwrap a slice of lemon drizzle cake from the fridge while we set up for the next segment.
Oh, God. Cake. He's always on about cake.
Goodbye. What dear baby dear from your eye? I don't know any more words.
I was going to say, I was alarmed that you knew that many. You don't know any more.
Yeah.
What was that phrase?
I
know all the right notes, not necessarily in the right order or even in the right tune.
I, however, know all the words and all the notes, but I'm too kind to our listeners.
You need to get out more.
I am the only Welshman who can't sing.
Don't let that get out.
Well, considering the previous the conversation before the break, in that case, then we will not ask you to sing "Men of Harlock" as we play out of the episode.
I can do it great when I'm drunk.
Right, well, it sounds great to you when you're drunk.
Okay, well, in that case, then is this something that we need to record when you and Dave get together on Lardiff, then?
And then overdub my best Sergeant Major Shut Up impersonation later.
Something like that. Well, it's I think after everything, including a large mailbag, I think it's about time we got out of here, don't you think, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, if we're all done, and if Mr. Whitaker's finished his latest slice of cake.
Cakegate.
We shall
let it go. Go on, just let it go.
we shall call it a day. Okay, so
or a night even.
Well, yes. Wonders of podcasting and all that. So, what have you got in store for us next time, guys?
Well, coming up next, Neil, we have an interview with Simon Hall, which will be in episode 181, coming out sometime in October when you get back from your holiday.
I might get a chance to edit it together before I go away. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to edit it while I'm on holiday because I'm not taking this laptop with me. So it'll either come out on around about October, October the 13th ish, or it'll be late. I'm afraid, and that's simply down to the fact of we're not going to be around for a week in the middle. I'm not going to be around for a week in the middle of October.
No. And Simon's going to talk about his new set of rules, Mortium et Gloriam.
Mortium et Gloriam, indeed, which I know I've already talked about a couple of times. I've had a game, and I'm actually really impressed with. Yeah, so we're getting Simon on the show. And other than that, we've got our usual mix of news and what we've been up to. Insanity. Maybe a bit more listener mailbag. We'll see what we can put together for you.
We've been asked to review Men Who Would Be Kings as well.
Well, in that case, then, Mr. Whitaker, can I task you with the job of maybe interviewing one of the guys who playtested Men Who Would Be Kings, since he happens to be a member of your club?
Oh, that'll be tough. Go on then.
Hey.
as well as also happening to be in my band.
Well, there is that as well. I mean, you do kind of know the guy kind of fairly intimately, but not in that sense.
Not as intimately as you and Luffy.
And
on that note.
My eyes.
Indeed, we shall... Well, it's all that's left is to apologise for that last mental image, and say once again thank you to everybody for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you.
We're going to enjoy editing it.
Indeed. Thank you once again to my fellow presenters for joining us. Thank you to Mr. Luff for managing to finish proper work in time to join us on the radio, not once but twice.
Well, there you go. What can I say?
God,
Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you to the Welsh Wizard himself, Mr. Michael Hobbs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you all.
yeah, look out for the cats.
Just wait till they start bringing in the local fauna.
No.
Yeah, they're not allowed out yet.
No. They're still stuck in.
Dudley has finally figured out he brought a worm in yesterday. A worm!
One of mine brought in the neighbour's pet rabbit last year.
Was that a new small rabbit?
5-week-old rabbit, yeah, they left it alone in the garden.
Oh, that wasn't wise.
No.
Oh, dear.
Didn't go down well.
Oh, I probably do
imagine
with the cat.
No. Worst thing is, he gave it to my neighbour. Didn't bring it to me, no. It was to my neighbour.
What was that? Was that, excuse me, mate, I found this in your garden.
Oops.
No to do with me.
Oh, dear, oh, Lord. There's that story you hear tell of the cat stealing the Sunday roast and bringing it in. And I've always wondered what the scene looks like at the far end of that. Dear, could you just go and get the Sunday roast? I left it resting on the kitchen side. It's not there, love. What do you mean it's not there? I've told you, how many times do I have to tell you to use your flipping eye? Look, no, it's not there. Oh my God, so it isn't. Could you go to the chicken? Could you go to the freezer and get some chicken breasts out, please?
I do have a very similar story, which I can tell you one day.
Oh dear. I think we may have outlived our welcome. Shall we knock it on the head, Neil?
Indeed, and I suppose I should say also thank you to the Phantom Cake Snatcher for once again joining us.
Oh, yeah, which reminds me, there's still a piece left for next time.
Joy.
Like the Murphys, he's not bitter.
Indeed.
This podcast has been sponsored by Merv's excellent lemon drizzle cake.
Yeah.
Indeed, and
other Irish stouts are available.
yes, and Wolf Brewery stuff is really nice.
It'll be a quick outro, they said. 5 minutes, they said. Get them quickly, they said.
Be able to go bed soon, he said.
Yeah.
The wife's not home yet.
Until next time, thanks for listening, guys. We'll speak to you really soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, why not share it with others by leaving us a review on iTunes? And if you have any comments or questions, you can always email the show. The address is info@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. And you can also visit our webpage, where you'll find a complete episode archive, all the View from the Veranda podcasts, rules reviews, and our blog of hobby items and news, which is updated several times a week. This is also where you'll find the links to our presence on social media, and here you can follow us on Twitter or join our Facebook group. And finally, here you can also find details should you wish to support us by making a donation to the podcast. All this on the Meeples and Miniatures website, www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.